The comet designated 3I Atlas is unlike anything humanity has ever encountered in the recorded history of celestial observation. Discovered streaking through the outer reaches of the solar system, it did not take long before astronomers realized that this visitor was not from the Oort cloud or any local reservoir of icy debris. It was interstellar, the third object of its kind ever identified, hence the prefix 3I. But what set 3I Atlas apart from the two previous interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and Borisov, was its trajectory. It was not simply passing through. It was bound on a close approach to the Sun so extreme that it would venture deeper into the inner solar system than any interstellar body ever known to have done. The implications of this event reach across multiple fields of science, from astrophysics to planetary defense, from the chemistry of cosmic dust to the long-sought origins of organic matter. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. When 3I Atlas was first detected, it appeared as a faint, slow-moving object beyond the orbit of Jupiter, its path arcing inward with unusual precision. Telescopic analysis revealed a hyperbolic trajectory, confirming its interstellar nature. But the real astonishment came from the calculated perihelion, the point at which it would come closest to the Sun. The numbers placed it within the orbit of Mercury, nearly grazing the solar corona. This made it a natural laboratory for observing how material formed in another star system reacts to the most intense radiation environment our solar system offers. Scientists and enthusiasts alike began to speak of it not as just another astronomical curiosity, but as a cosmic messenger, a sample of another world now plunging into our star's gravitational well. The physical structure of 3I Atlas fascinated researchers from the beginning. Its spectral fingerprint did not match any known comet in our catalogs. The ratios of cyanide, carbon monoxide, and complex organics were completely alien, implying chemical processes that occurred in a different stellar nursery, under conditions our Sun never experienced. Some of its detected molecules appeared unstable even in the cold of interstellar space, leading to speculation that they were trapped remnants of exotic ices, perhaps nitrogen-based, or even compounds of metals that only form under unusual radiation fields. As it approached the Sun, these mysteries promised to unfold in spectacular fashion, with each degree of increased heat peeling back layers of unknown chemistry. For decades, astrophysicists had theorized about interstellar objects that might venture near enough to our Sun to be vaporized and studied in real time. But none had ever offered such an opportunity. When 3I Atlas began to brighten, solar observatories worldwide prepared for an unprecedented campaign of coordinated observation. The Parker Solar Probe, already orbiting closer to the Sun than any spacecraft in history, was repositioned to intercept the region of space where 3I Atlas would pass. The solar orbiter adjusted its instruments, ready to capture spectroscopic data as the interstellar comet's tail bloomed and interacted with the solar wind. For the first time, humanity would witness a body forged under another star's light meeting the full fury of ours. The excitement was not merely scientific. There was something profoundly symbolic about the encounter, a piece of another world touching the heart of our own solar system. Many observers felt that watching 3I Atlas plunge toward the Sun was like watching a cosmic handshake between two stellar civilizations separated by light years. Its name, borrowed from the Atlas telescope survey that first spotted it, became a banner for global fascination. Amateur astronomers set up telescopes in deserts and mountaintops, while professional observatories in Hawaii, Chile, and space trained their lenses on a speck of moving light that seemed to carry the stories of distant suns. As it neared Mars's orbit, 3I Atlas began to develop a visible coma, a glowing halo of gas and dust that spread for thousands of kilometers. Yet this coma did not behave like that of an ordinary comet. Instead of the greenish tinge of carbon diatomic emissions or the pale white of water vapor, it shimmered with a peculiar bluish-violet light. Spectral analysis suggested fluorescence caused by molecules rarely stable near stars, compounds of boron, nitrogen, and exotic silicates. This indicated that the object had formed around a star rich in heavier elements, perhaps even one older than our Sun. The sight was otherworldly, almost spectral, a glowing fingerprint of a star long gone or light years away. The composition of its dust raised even deeper questions. As the Sun's heat began to liberate fine particles from its surface, instruments detected carbon structures of extraordinary complexity, rings and chains resembling prebiotic molecules. The possibility that interstellar comets like 3I Atlas could seed planetary systems with the building blocks of life gained renewed attention. Some researchers proposed that comets such as this might be the vehicles by which the universe distributes life's raw ingredients across galaxies. If true, 3I Atlas was not merely a visitor, it was a carrier of cosmic continuity, a thread connecting countless worlds through chemistry and chance. But the most dramatic phase of the journey was yet to come. As it crossed inside the orbit of Venus, solar radiation increased 1,000-fold. Jets of gas erupted from fissures across its surface, driving plumes that reached tens of thousands of kilometers. Each eruption revealed new substances, from metal oxides to volatile crystals that quickly disintegrated into clouds of luminous vapor. The sun, in a sense, was dissecting the object layer by layer, performing a natural experiment that human technology could never replicate. The resulting data poured in from every instrument humanity had aimed at the sky. Some observatories detected shifts in the solar wind as it interacted with the comet's rapidly expanding ion tail, a stream of charged particles that stretched halfway to Earth's orbit. The collision of alien matter with the sun's plasma produced magnetic ripples that shimmered through the heliosphere, measurable by probes across multiple planets. The implications of this were staggering. For the first time, scientists could watch how interstellar matter responds to solar magnetism, providing insights into how different stars sculpt their surrounding space. The comparison between 3I, Atlas's reaction, and that of ordinary comets from our solar system promised to rewrite the models of stellar wind dynamics. It might also help refine our understanding of how planetary systems evolve and why certain kinds of material manage to survive, or fail to survive, within harsh stellar environments. Observing the interaction also gave solar physicists a new way to calibrate models of space weather, particularly how foreign dust and magnetic fields can alter the behavior of charged particles near the sun. Even more extraordinary were the hints of isotopic anomalies in the gas expelled from the comet. Some of its elements appeared to bear ratios inconsistent with any known star in our neighborhood. This suggested that 3I Atlas had originated in a system that experienced a supernova influence or formed near the remnants of an older stellar population. Such findings could reshape how scientists trace the genealogy of matter in our galaxy. It reinforced the view that interstellar travelers are like time capsules, preserving material from eras and environments we can never otherwise access. As it drew closer still, 3I Atlas began to glow so brightly that it rivaled the brightness of Venus in the dawn sky. To the naked eye, it was a faint, ghostly torch trailing a thin, violet-tinged plume. Millions of people rose before sunrise to glimpse the visitor that had crossed the gulf between stars to pay its respects to our sun. The sense of awe was universal, transcending scientific interest. It was as if the cosmos had decided to remind humanity of its place within a vast and interconnected universe, where even the smallest fragments of ice and dust carry stories billions of years in the making. Astronomers predicted that as it reached its perihelion, 3I Atlas would experience intense sublimation, possibly breaking apart under the heat and tidal forces of the sun. But even in destruction, it promised revelation. Instruments aboard the Parker Solar Probe and the Solar Orbiter prepared to record every moment, hoping to catch glimpses of the disintegration process. For those observing from Earth, the spectacle would unfold as a brief but brilliant flare as sunlight refracted through jets of material expelled at unimaginable speeds. Each fragment, each grain of dust, would become a messenger, carrying with it traces of alien chemistry into the solar wind. The study of such debris could answer questions that have puzzled scientists for decades. How do interstellar comets retain volatiles for millions of years in the cold of deep space? How are organic molecules formed in environments without sunlight? What processes govern the assembly of planetary systems beyond our own? 3I Atlas, by approaching the sun, offered to illuminate these mysteries. Its destruction would scatter material across a volume of space where human instruments could sample it indirectly, through analysis of sunlight and charged particle readings. The solar wind, infused with dust from another star, might even drift outward toward the edges of our system, eventually mingling with the interstellar medium from which it once came, a poetic return to the void. Beyond science, the event also stirred deep philosophical contemplation. For millennia, humans have watched comets with a mixture of fear and wonder, interpreting them as omens or symbols of change. The difference now was that humanity understood what it was seeing, yet the awe remained. 3. Atlas represented more than just an astronomical event. It was a reminder that the boundaries of the solar system are porous, that the universe is not a collection of isolated islands, but a dynamic web of exchange. Every atom in our bodies once traveled through such currents of cosmic migration. Watching 3I Atlas skim the sun's inferno was like watching a reflection of our own cosmic ancestry. Even before it reached the inner solar system, theoretical physicists began modeling the thermodynamics of its surface. As sunlight intensified, the outer crust, perhaps rich in exotic ices, would begin to sublimate violently, producing pressure differentials strong enough to crack the nucleus. Some predicted that it would fragment into a series of smaller bodies, each following slightly divergent paths. Others speculated that its dense composition might allow it to survive largely intact, becoming one of the closest interstellar objects ever observed near a star. Either outcome would provide unprecedented insight into the resilience of material forged in alien environments. The possibility of survival intrigued scientists, especially because it challenged assumptions about interstellar erosion. Space between stars is filled with radiation, micrometeoroids, and cosmic rays that gradually strip material from exposed surfaces. Yet 3I Atlas appeared relatively pristine. Its albedo, or reflectivity, suggested it retained a dark carbon-rich coating that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, perhaps a natural armor against cosmic damage. If such protective chemistry proved common among interstellar objects, it might mean that vast numbers of these travelers survive long enough to cross between star systems intact, potentially ferrying not just simple molecules, but even microbial life across galactic distances. The implications for panspermia, the hypothesis that life spreads through space via comets and asteroids, were profound. Within the scientific community, debates intensified about whether 3I Atlas might represent an entirely new class of object. Its interstellar predecessors had each defied easy categorization. Oumuamua behaved more like an asteroid than a comet, while Borisov was a classic cometary body. 3I Atlas, however, seemed to embody characteristics of both, a hybrid that blurred the lines between solid and volatile, mineral and molecular. Some researchers proposed that it could be the remnant of a shattered exoplanet, its crust stripped and refrozen during ejection from its home system. Others entertained more speculative possibilities. Perhaps it was a fragment of a protoplanetary disk, a survivor from a star that never fully formed. Whatever its origin, it was a tangible piece of another world entering ours. As days passed and the sun's glare swallowed it from ordinary view, instruments continued to track its thermal emissions. The data suggested a rapidly evolving surface, with temperature gradients so extreme that portions of its body might be melting into amorphous carbon. Each outburst created new plumes that reflected sunlight in unpredictable ways, turning the comet into a dynamic, ever-changing mirror. It was as if the object itself were alive, responding to its environment in a dance of chemistry and physics too complex for simple models to capture. The spectacle forced a re-evaluation of how matter behaves under the combined influences of heat, gravity, and magnetic fields at interstellar scales. The comet's approach also held practical implications for planetary defense. Studying how its material interacted with solar radiation gave scientists new tools to model how hazardous comets or asteroids might respond to intense energy input. If 3I Atlas's composition could be analyzed thoroughly, it might reveal new methods for deflecting or fragmenting incoming bodies through controlled heating or radiation pressure. Understanding the thresholds of sublimation for alien ices and minerals could inform strategies for protecting Earth in the future. In a sense, this cosmic visitor was not only expanding our understanding of the universe, but also teaching us how to defend our place within it. As it entered the region within Mercury's orbit, the spectacle became truly celestial. Ground-based coronagraphs caught glimpses of its long, streaming tail bending sharply under the influence of the sun's magnetic field. The solar wind sculpted it into a double structure, one component of dust, the other of ionized gas, each pointing in slightly different directions. The inner tail, faintly electric blue, pulsed with the rhythm of solar activity, flaring brighter when coronal mass ejections struck it. This interaction offered a vivid three-dimensional view of how magnetic fields shape cosmic matter, allowing scientists to trace invisible solar currents through the visible behavior of the comet's tail. By then, the comet had become a target for every major observatory on Earth. Radio telescopes scanned for emissions from exotic molecules. Infrared detectors measured the heat radiating from its surface. Even neutrino observatories watched for any signs of high-energy particles released during its closest passage. Each wavelength told a different part of the story. Together, they painted a portrait of a worldlet undergoing rapid metamorphosis under the pressure of our star's light, a transformation that paralleled on a smaller scale the processes that shape entire solar systems. The cultural resonance of 3YE, Atlas's journey, was equally profound. Across the world, artists, poets, and filmmakers found inspiration in the spectacle. It symbolized movement, discovery, and the inevitability of change. Philosophers compared its journey to the human condition, a being cast out from its birthplace, wandering the void until it encounters a source of illumination so powerful it transforms forever. Religious thinkers found metaphor in its passage too, seeing in its fiery approach a reflection of faith, sacrifice, or rebirth. Yet underlying all interpretations was a shared recognition. The universe remains an open story, and 3I Atlas was a chapter that unfolded before our eyes. As 3I Atlas drew still closer to the blazing heart of the solar system, the entire architecture of the comet began to change in ways that defied earlier predictions. The dense mantle of carbon-black dust that once cloaked its nucleus started to peel away, revealing a mosaic of crystalline surfaces beneath, facets that reflected sunlight like shards of alien glass. These surfaces flashed with colors unseen in ordinary comets: deep violet, azure, and subtle gold. Astronomers speculated that the reflections were caused by metallic silicates and exotic compounds born in the atmosphere of another sun, perhaps one that had burned hotter or older than ours. The comet's body, once assumed to be a simple lump of frozen volatiles, now appeared to be a layered archive of ancient processes, each stratum recording a moment in the evolution of its home system. Instruments trained on it detected the faint pulse of rotational oscillations, suggesting that the jets of gas erupting from its surface were spinning it faster and faster. Such rotation threatened to tear it apart. Yet somehow the nucleus held together longer than expected, as though bound by internal cohesion beyond what porous ice could explain. Scientists began to suspect that interstellar comets might be denser and more complexly structured than any born within our own system. If the heart of 3I Atlas contained metallic cores or refractory minerals, it could endure tidal stress in ways that challenged conventional comet models. This realization began to ripple through planetary science, prompting the re-evaluation of comet formation theories and the possible link between icy bodies and planetesimal fragments ejected during violent planetary births. Every minute that passed brought the comet into a more extreme realm of radiation. The solar corona roared around it, streams of charged particles wrapping its path in turbulence. Spacecraft sensors registered minute fluctuations in magnetic fields, ripples that propagated outward like waves from a stone dropped into an ocean of plasma. These disturbances told physicists that 3I Atlas was not merely a passive object, but an active participant in shaping the sun's environment. Its vaporizing gases became a conduit for energy exchange, converting sunlight into kinetic storms that danced along invisible magnetic lines. Never before had a comet revealed so vividly the dialogue between matter and the energy fields that pervade the heliosphere. On Earth, supercomputers simulated these interactions in real time. The data poured in so quickly that analysis lagged behind observation. Each burst of activity demanded new calculations, new physics. Teams around the globe coordinated through virtual observatories, sharing spectra, particle counts, and images that captured the comet in its throes. For the first time in human history, an interstellar object was being studied not as a distant curiosity, but as a dynamic laboratory in motion. The collaboration was extraordinary. Crossing political and cultural boundaries, researchers from nations long estranged found themselves speaking a common language of science, united by fascination and wonder. In this sense, 3I Atlas became not just a visitor between stars, but a bridge between people. As the comet's tail lengthened, stretching tens of millions of kilometers, it began to interact with the solar wind in complex patterns. Instead of a simple arc trailing behind it, The tail split and braided into filaments, twisting like strands of illuminated silk. Each filament traced the path of charged ions caught in magnetic eddies, revealing the invisible scaffolding of the sun's influence. Observers marveled at the sight through space-based coronagraphs, a living tapestry of light and plasma, painted across the void by a messenger from beyond. For artists and poets, it was the stuff of myth reborn. For physicists, it was a revelation about the shape of magnetic topology on cosmic scales. Deep inside the glow of the coma, temperatures soared beyond what any known cometary material could withstand. Yet rather than disintegrating entirely, sections of 3I Atlas appeared to liquefy and refreeze in rapid cycles, forming smooth, glass-like regions where molten silicates cooled before being blown away. This process suggested that interstellar comets could forge natural materials impossible to create in laboratories. Amorphous alloys and compounds formed under microgravity and extreme heat. The idea that fragments of such material might later drift into interplanetary space excited engineers and chemists alike. They imagined future missions designed to harvest such interstellar relics, seeking clues about the chemistry of distant worlds, or perhaps even substances with unique industrial potential. At the same time, spectroscopic readings revealed fleeting signatures of isotopes heavier than those found in our solar neighborhood, traces of technetium, hafnium, and even elements associated with neutron star synthesis. These discoveries ignited intense speculation. Had 3I Atlas originated near a binary star, or within the turbulent debris of a supernova? If so, its journey across light years was not just a random drift, but a cosmic pilgrimage from a region touched by cataclysm. The concept that a body born from the ashes of a stellar explosion was now brushing against the heat of our living sun carried an emotional gravity that transcended science. It was as though the universe had written a cycle of death and rebirth across unimaginable distances, and Earth's observers were privileged to read a line of that script. The approach of perihelion also provided unprecedented insight into the energy balance of interstellar objects. Scientists compared the comet's albedo and infrared emissions to infer the efficiency with which it absorbed and radiated heat. The data indicated a material surface unlike any cataloged before, one that trapped energy in deeper layers before releasing it in delayed bursts. This behavior created surges of luminosity that caused the comet to flicker like a living flame. Each pulse was a heartbeat of physics, revealing how matter that evolved under foreign stars adapts to new energy environments. The flickering became so rhythmic that researchers joked it was as if the comet were communicating, a Morse code of heat and light whispered across millions of kilometers. Meanwhile, the Parker Solar Probe captured high-resolution images of the plasma boundary where the comet's outgassing met the solar wind. The collision zone shimmered with auroral colors, generating ultraviolet arcs and radio emissions that rippled outward through the heliosphere. For radio astronomers, these emissions offered a new method to probe the structure of the solar magnetic field. They could trace, through the comet's passage, how the field bent and twisted under dynamic pressures. It was a gift of data that would take years to unpack, each frequency band revealing layers of interaction no previous experiment could reproduce. Back on Earth, the public followed the event with a fervor normally reserved for eclipses or planetary alignments. Schools broadcast live feeds of solar observatories, children drawing the image of a glowing comet diving toward the sun. The moment transcended the domain of scientists and entered collective imagination. Commentators spoke of it as a mirror held up to humanity's own journey, an echo of our curiosity and vulnerability in the face of forces far greater than ourselves. The sight of 3I Atlas, tiny yet magnificent, cutting through the radiance of the sun, reminded people that discovery often comes from encounters with the unknown, from daring to reach into peril for understanding. As the comet neared its final descent, particle detectors registered an extraordinary phenomenon: bursts of positrons, antimatter counterparts to electrons, appearing intermittently in the plasma wake. This was unexpected. While the quantities were minuscule, the pattern suggested that extreme photoionization at the comet's surface was producing short-lived regions of matter-antimatter interaction. The implications extended far beyond cometary science. Physicists considered whether such processes might contribute to the mysterious imbalance between matter and antimatter in the universe. Perhaps objects like 3I Atlas, forged under conditions unlike those near our sun, carried within them clues to asymmetry seeded in the first moments after the Big Bang. During its closest approach, the comet was enveloped entirely within the solar corona, invisible to optical telescopes but tracked through instruments measuring X-ray and radio flux. For several hours, the sun itself became an experiment chamber. The heat tore apart molecules, freeing atoms that glowed fiercely before being swept into the sun's vast electromagnetic field. To the scientists analyzing the data, it was as if they were watching the disassembly of a star system's DNA, the breakdown of alien chemistry into elemental truth. Every spectral line recorded from that moment became a key to understanding environments unreachable by any probe. Even as the nucleus dwindled, its influence extended outward. Shockwaves propagated through the solar wind, creating subtle disturbances that reached as far as Earth's orbit. Satellite sensors detected changes in particle flux, slight but measurable. These ripples of interstellar dust interacting with solar magnetism illustrated how profoundly even a small body could influence vast regions of space. Space weather forecasters adjusted their models, noting how such transient events might alter radiation belts or affect the trajectories of future missions. It was a vivid demonstration that the boundaries between local and cosmic phenomena were more fluid than once believed. The scientific community began discussing the broader cosmic context of such visitors. If 3I Atlas was the third interstellar object detected in a short span of decades, then the galaxy might be teeming with countless others drifting silently between the stars. Each one a fragment of a lost system, each carrying the potential to teach, to transform. New surveys were planned, networks of telescopes designed specifically to spot these wanderers early enough for interception. Space agencies considered dispatching rapid response probes capable of rendezvousing with future interstellar arrivals, collecting samples before they vanished. The dream of touching material from beyond the solar system was no longer distant fantasy but tangible strategy. Among the most compelling discussions was the possibility that 3I Atlas had once belonged to a system not unlike our own, a system with planets, perhaps even with life. If its ejection resulted from gravitational chaos caused by planetary migration or stellar perturbation, then the dust it carried could include remnants of worlds. Tiny grains of rock or ice embedded in its matrix might once have been part of an exoplanet's crust or atmosphere. Analyzing those grains, even indirectly through their vaporized spectra, could tell us what kind of chemistry shaped those lost environments. The notion that our instruments might already have recorded the fingerprints of alien worlds within that data electrified the scientific imagination. The philosophical echo of this idea was enormous. It blurred the boundary between here and there, between our sun and the others scattered through the Milky Way. If the atoms released by 3I Atlas were now merging with solar particles, then in a literal sense our star had just absorbed material from another system. The sun itself became an archive of galactic memory. Future generations of astronomers might trace those isotopic signatures in the solar wind and recognize them as remnants of a long-ago encounter between stars. The universe, once seen as vast and disconnected, appeared more like an ocean where currents of matter continuously flow and intermingle. As the comet began to fade into the brilliance of the solar glare, attention turned to the tail it left behind. Vast clouds of dust now spiraled outward, tracing a luminous path that would persist for weeks. These clouds, pushed by solar radiation, spread into a fan that eventually crossed the orbit of Venus. Instruments on the planet's surface and orbit recorded faint increases in particulate density. For a brief time, Venus was brushed by the touch of interstellar dust, a gentle rain of material older than the solar system itself. Though invisible to human eyes, that meeting of alien dust and planetary atmosphere symbolized a cosmic handshake between worlds separated by millions of years of evolution. Meanwhile, Earth's atmosphere also began to feel the faintest whisper of that material. Micrometeor detectors in orbit recorded sporadic impacts consistent with high-velocity dust grains of interstellar origin. Each one, no larger than a grain of sand, carried within it the atomic story of another sun. Researchers anticipated that over time, the solar wind would carry more such particles outward, sprinkling them across the planets and beyond. The journey of 3I Atlas would thus continue long after its visible form was gone, its essence dispersed into the fabric of the solar system. The data gathered from this event began to reshape long-held models of cosmic chemistry. For decades, astrophysicists had debated whether the heavy elements required for life were evenly distributed across the galaxy or clustered in certain regions. The spectra from 3I Atlas provided compelling evidence that some regions of space produce far richer organic complexity than others. It suggested that life's ingredients might not be rare, but woven into the natural evolution of stellar systems. Each star, through its birth, life, and death, contributes to a cycle of enrichment, scattering seeds that may one day coalesce into living worlds. In this view, 3I Atlas was both a messenger and a seed, proof that the mechanisms of creation transcend distance and time. On a more immediate scale, engineers studying the comet's interaction with sunlight found inspiration for new propulsion technologies. The way solar radiation pressure sculpted and accelerated the tail offered clues for optimizing light-sail spacecraft. Observing how micron-sized dust responded to the energy of the sun helped refine calculations about momentum transfer and stability. In the future, ships driven by sunlight might trace their design lineage back to lessons learned from the luminous arc of 3I Atlas. What began as a celestial wonder could thus lead to the practical means of interstellar travel, the very journey the comet itself had undertaken. Culturally, the phenomenon left an indelible mark. Literature, music, and art absorbed its imagery with zeal. Writers envisioned civilizations that might have watched their own comet depart eons ago, unaware it would one day blaze across another sun's sky. Painters captured the colors of its tail as metaphors for migration and transformation. Musicians composed symphonies structured around its pulse, using rhythm to evoke the comet's flickering light. In this way, 3I Atlas became more than an astronomical event. It became a symbol of continuity between science and imagination, a reminder that the universe speaks in both equations and poetry. For those who worked directly with the data, the sense of discovery was deeply personal. Many had spent their careers preparing for such a moment, wondering if they would ever witness an interstellar visitor of this magnitude. The collaboration fostered new generations of scientists, students inspired by the shared pursuit of knowledge, conferences filled with spirited debate and newfound humility. Every answer seemed to open new questions. How many such objects traverse our system unseen? Could some have seeded Earth itself with life's building blocks in the distant past? And what does it mean philosophically that our star has now mingled its light with matter from another? The comet's long tail gradually faded as solar radiation dispersed its material. Yet even in its absence, the aftermath within the sun's magnetic field persisted. Observers noticed that certain regions of the corona exhibited unusual brightness for weeks afterward, as if residual material from 3I Atlas continued to excite the plasma. The phenomenon hinted at a lingering interaction, perhaps the creation of temporary dust rings or magnetic eddies that would orbit the sun for months. If so, these remnants would provide continuing opportunities for study, allowing scientists to trace the gradual assimilation of alien material into our star's ecosystem. The scientific implications extended to planetary formation theories. By comparing the isotopic composition of 3I Atlas's vapor to models of early solar material, researchers discovered patterns suggesting that interstellar exchange may play a key role in the diversity of planetary systems. If comets routinely migrate between stars, then no planetary system is entirely self-contained. Each generation of stars inherits a mixture of matter from countless ancestors. This idea reframed humanity's understanding of origin. The atoms that form our planets, our oceans, and our bodies might once have belonged to other suns, just as the dust of 3I Atlas now joined ours. The cosmos, viewed through this lens, became a vast genealogy of shared substance. As discussions turned to the long-term consequences of such interactions, some astronomers proposed that the sun's future composition might subtly shift due to repeated infusions of interstellar material. Over millions of years, these microscopic contributions could alter the isotopic fingerprint of the solar atmosphere, creating detectable patterns that future civilizations might interpret as records of ancient encounters. In this sense, 3I Atlas might not only teach humanity about its origins, but also leave a signature for those who come after, a faint, enduring mark of connection between stars. Philosophers and theologians found new metaphors in the event. The idea of an object traveling for millions of years through darkness, only to end in brilliance, resonated as a story of transformation. It invited reflections on purpose, destiny, and impermanence. Some saw in the comet's sacrifice a reminder that enlightenment often comes through dissolution, that knowledge requires vulnerability to forces beyond control. Others viewed it as a symbol of unity, the universe demonstrating through action that separation is illusion. Whatever interpretation one adopted, the sight of 3I Atlas burning near the sun transcended language. It was an experience of the sublime. Technological advances born from studying the event began to appear even as observations continued. New algorithms developed to track the comet's plasma interactions were adapted for monitoring space weather, improving predictions for solar storms that could affect satellites and power grids. The detection techniques refined for identifying interstellar composition were repurposed for analyzing exoplanetary atmospheres. In this way, the knowledge gleaned from 3I Atlas began to ripple outward, influencing disciplines from astrophysics to climate science. The comet's visit became a catalyst for innovation, proving once again that curiosity is the engine of progress. The fading traces of 3I Atlas continued to drift through the inner solar system like a whisper in sunlight, invisible to the naked eye but not to the instruments that had learned to listen for its echo. Months after its incandescent passage, the sensors aboard deep space probes still registered faint anomalies, subtle fluctuations in particle density, minute chemical signatures that did not match anything native to our solar neighborhood. It was as if a ghostly breath from another sun lingered in the corridors of the heliosphere. The event had ended in brightness, yet its influence was only beginning to unfold. Every new analysis revealed that the comet's legacy extended far beyond its brief encounter with our star. It had not only carried the story of another system, but had rewritten a small part of our own. In laboratories across the world, tiny fragments of dust collected by high-altitude aircraft and orbital detectors were undergoing painstaking analysis. Each grain, smaller than a mote of smoke, represented the surviving ashes of a world older than our own. When subjected to spectroscopy, they revealed crystalline patterns that defied ordinary classification. Some contained lattices built around trace metals rarely seen in natural terrestrial minerals, aligned in geometric perfection as though shaped by processes foreign to our familiar chemistry. Scientists described them as frozen harmonics, structures that seem to record oscillations of light and temperature from the early epochs of another star's birth. The thought that the sunlight of a distant sun might still vibrate within the arrangement of atoms was enough to move even the most hardened empiricists to awe. Among the findings was something even more startling: clusters of carbon compounds arranged in configurations too complex to be random. They were not biological, but they suggested self-organizing tendencies, chains that could catalyze reactions under the right conditions. This discovery reignited the debate about panspermia with unprecedented intensity. If such molecular precursors were common in interstellar debris, then the seeds of chemistry necessary for life might spread through the galaxy as naturally as pollen carried on the wind. The universe itself could be a garden whose blossoms bloom wherever conditions allow. The dust of 3I Atlas had become the latest and most compelling chapter in that grand hypothesis. Beyond the laboratories, the theoretical implications continued to reverberate. Astrophysicists began recalibrating their models of stellar formation to account for the new isotopic data. The ratios of certain elements suggested that the comet originated in a region enriched by multiple generations of stellar death, a galactic nursery where supernovae had seeded the medium with heavy metals and rare isotopes. This meant that the birthplace of 3I Atlas might have been far older than the Sun, perhaps tracing its lineage to one of the earliest waves of star formation in the Milky Way. It was an emissary not merely from another system, but from another era. Through it, the early history of the galaxy had come within reach of human measurement. As astronomers reconstructed its probable trajectory, they discovered that its inbound path had intersected the galactic plane at a steep angle, implying that it had traveled for eons through the interstellar halo, regions sparsely populated, exposed to cosmic rays of unimaginable energy. Surviving such a journey required durability far beyond ordinary ice and rock. The fact that 3I Atlas had remained intact long enough to reach our sun hinted at unknown mechanisms of structural reinforcement. Some speculated that its interior might have fused into exotic forms of carbon, perhaps even patches of quasi-crystalline diamond. If true, then the comet's heart could be one of the most ancient and resilient natural objects ever encountered. The idea of such endurance fascinated engineers who saw in it a potential model for materials science. Research teams began mimicking the thermal and radiation conditions the comet had endured, seeking to recreate its molecular stability. The resulting studies promised applications in spacecraft shielding, quantum computing substrates, and even high-efficiency solar absorbers. In an unexpected way, 3I Atlas was catalyzing technological revolutions long after its physical form had vanished. What began as a cosmic spectacle was evolving into a legacy of innovation that might one day carry humanity farther into the stars. Yet beyond all the scientific excitement lay a quieter, more contemplative resonance. For months, artists, philosophers, and writers found themselves drawn to the symbolism of the event. The notion of a wanderer from another sun consumed by light, leaving behind both mystery and transformation. Museums curated exhibitions combining scientific imagery with creative interpretation, holographic renderings of the comet's final arcs accompanied by music composed from its recorded plasma oscillations. People stood before these displays in silence, sensing that they were witnessing something that transcended data. 3I Atlas had become a mirror for humanity's own longing to understand where it came from and where it was going. Even as its dust dispersed, telescopes continued to trace the faint glow of the plasma ribbons it had left behind. Those remnants formed ephemeral arcs that drifted through the inner solar system, interacting with magnetic fields and occasionally producing soft auroral flares when intersecting Earth's magnetosphere. On rare nights, observers at high latitudes reported unusual colors rippling across the sky, pale violet and amber tones mixed with the usual greens. Scientists attributed them to residual ions from the comet's passage. For the public, they became known as Atlas lights, a fleeting gift from an interstellar traveler. The skies seemed to have absorbed a little of that alien light and now returned it in gestures of remembrance. The implications of 3I Atlas extended into questions of cosmic architecture. The discovery that such objects could pass so close to the Sun without immediate annihilation suggested that interstellar debris moves through our galactic neighborhood more frequently than anyone had realized. Surveys began to reveal subtle gravitational perturbations in the outer solar system, hints that other foreign objects might be passing silently beyond Neptune. The possibility of an entire stream of interstellar matter, perhaps remnants of a disrupted planetary system, became an active area of investigation. If such streams existed, they might form invisible corridors of material connecting star systems like veins through which the galaxy circulates its matter. Within the halls of observatories, discussions grew increasingly daring. Could interstellar travelers like 3I Atlas serve as natural vehicles for communication across the stars? Not in the conventional sense of radio signals or lasers, but through the intentional seeding of information within their material structure, encoded isotopic ratios, complex molecular arrangements, or even quantum patterns preserved in crystal lattices. Though speculative, the idea captured imaginations. If advanced civilizations existed, might they have used such objects to send knowledge across millennia, knowing that natural wanderers already traverse these paths? Scientists began to scrutinize the data anew, not for messages as humans conceive them, but for anomalies that defied natural explanation. So far, none were found, but the notion itself expanded humanity's perspective on what communication might mean in a cosmic context. Meanwhile, the solar wind carried remnants of the comet outward, dispersing them through the heliosphere and eventually into interstellar space. Spacecraft positioned at the fringes of the solar system, including those launched decades earlier, began to detect tiny upticks in dust density and unusual isotopic readings. These detections confirmed that 3I Atlas had, in a sense, joined our system to the wider galaxy, leaving a trail that extended far beyond its visible presence. Future generations of probes might one day encounter these same particles far from home, tracing them back to this singular event, a cosmic breadcrumb trail of interstellar exchange. The awareness that a fragment of another star now flowed within the currents of our own created a subtle shift in human consciousness. The division between our matter and theirs seemed to dissolve. People began to speak of the galaxy not as a collection of isolated systems, but as a living continuum, each part feeding and learning from the others. In this new cosmology, the sun was not merely a solitary fireball, but a participant in an ancient dialogue of matter. The atoms released from 3I Atlas would circulate through solar flares, drift into the atmospheres of planets, and eventually, perhaps, settle on Earth, where they might become part of soil, stone, or even living tissue. In this way, every person breathing beneath the sky became, however faintly, a host to the legacy of another world. The impact on education was profound. Schools revised curricula to include the story of 3I Atlas as a living example of cosmic interconnectedness. Students learn not only about comets and stars, but about the shared ancestry of matter, the way every atom cycles through endless transformations. Outreach programs used virtual simulations to let children ride alongside the comet's path, watching as it threaded through space toward the sun. For many young minds, this became their first visceral sense of belonging to a universe that is vast yet intimately connected. The event seeded a new generation of dreamers and scientists who would carry forward the search for understanding. In the academic world, the flood of data forced the creation of new analytical frameworks. Traditional comet models proved inadequate to explain the exotic chemistry observed. Researchers developed hybrid simulations that combined plasma physics, quantum chemistry, and relativistic modeling to capture the full behavior of an interstellar object under solar influence. The result was the emergence of an entirely new discipline, interstellar matter dynamics, bridging astrophysics and material science. Conferences dedicated to this field drew experts from diverse domains: astrophysicists, chemists, computational theorists, even philosophers of science. The study of 3I Atlas became a convergence point for disciplines that had rarely spoken to one another before. One of the most unexpected outcomes arose from radio data recorded during the comet's passage through the corona. Amid the chaotic noise of solar emissions, analysts detected faint modulations, patterns that repeated with mathematical precision. Initially dismissed as instrumental artifacts, they later proved to correspond to the natural oscillations of magnetic reconnection events triggered by the comet's ionized gases. This was the first direct evidence that a small interstellar object could influence large-scale solar processes. It suggested that even tiny masses, if charged and structured correctly, might serve as catalysts for magnetic phenomena on stellar surfaces. Theoretical astrophysicists seized on the discovery, considering its implications for understanding starspot cycles and flare dynamics. In effect, 3I Atlas had demonstrated that stars and wandering debris are not separate actors but participants in a continuous cosmic feedback loop. While scientists parsed the technical implications, storytellers found metaphors within the data. They spoke of the comet as a chord struck between suns, a vibration that momentarily synchronized the energies of two distant systems. Poets imagined that the light of 3I Atlas carried memories across space, awakening dormant awareness within the stars themselves. Even the most skeptical physicists could not entirely dismiss the poetry of that idea, for in a sense, every observation was an act of communion, our star responding to another through the language of physics. The event also reshaped the philosophy of exploration. For centuries, human ambition had been oriented outward, toward reaching new worlds, new frontiers. But 3I Atlas reminded observers that exploration is not only about departure, but about reception. Sometimes the unknown comes to us, bearing knowledge unbidden. This understanding led to renewed focus on readiness, maintaining instruments, open minds, and collaborative networks capable of seizing such moments when they arise. Space agencies began to design systems specifically to detect and engage transient phenomena, fleeting cosmic visitors that, like 3I Atlas, might appear only once in a civilization's lifetime. Another frontier opened in the study of temporal dynamics. Using the observed rate of mass loss and energy output, physicists could reconstruct the comet's pre-solar history in astonishing detail. Models suggested that before entering our system, 3I Atlas had passed within a few light years of multiple stars, each encounter subtly altering its trajectory. In one instance, it might have skirted the edge of a red giant's wind, accumulating layers of exotic dust. In another, it could have drifted through the debris of a young planetary system. Its surface, therefore, was a stratified history of the galaxy itself, a traveler that had witnessed the evolution of countless worlds. To study it, even in fragments, was to read a history book written in the language of matter. As humanity pieced together this narrative, fascination grew with the notion of origin. Where exactly had this object begun its journey? By cross-referencing isotopic ratios with stellar databases, researchers narrowed possibilities to a cluster of ancient stars on the far side of the galactic disk. Some of those stars were now dead, their light extinguished long before life arose on Earth. Yet here, within our sun's corona, a physical piece of that vanished system had reappeared. The connection bridged epochs so distant that human comprehension strained to grasp them. For a fleeting moment, two eras of the galaxy had touched, one living, one long gone, and their meeting had been witnessed by beings made of stardust themselves. Even after the comet's trail faded completely, its story continued to grow through imagination. Writers speculated about what other wanderers might yet approach, perhaps larger, perhaps carrying richer archives of alien chemistry. Some envisioned future missions designed not merely to observe but to capture such objects, sailing alongside them, drilling into their cores, returning samples across light years of travel. Others dreamed of finding within those cores signs of ancient intelligence, the fossilized artifacts of civilizations extinguished before our sun was born. Whether such dreams proved realistic or not, they expanded the horizon of possibility. Humanity's sense of the achievable stretched farther than ever before. The social impact of the event manifested in subtle yet pervasive ways. People began to look at the night sky with renewed intimacy. The idea that a fragment of another world had come so close to our sun kindled curiosity, even among those indifferent to astronomy. Public observatories saw surges in attendance. Telescope sales soared. Conversations about stars filled schools, cafes, and online forums. The cosmos had once again entered daily human consciousness, not as a distant abstraction, but as a tangible presence. That renewed wonder may prove the comet's most enduring gift. As time passed, the last direct traces of 3I Atlas vanished from detection, but the influence it exerted on science persisted in unexpected directions. The data gathered from its interaction with the sun's plasma led to the refinement of fusion research on Earth. Engineers applied models of the comet's material stability to design new containment systems for high-temperature reactors. The energy that once devoured the comet now inspired the mastery of controlled fire, the ancient dream of harnessing the power of the stars. It was as if the visitor had come to offer a lesson: knowledge through surrender, progress through transformation. Beyond technology, the event stirred discussions about identity on a cosmic scale. Philosophers of science began to speak of galactic continuity, the idea that life, matter, and consciousness are threads in a single unfolding fabric rather than isolated phenomena. If the same atoms that formed 3I Atlas now circulated through our star and our bodies, then individuality itself was a temporary arrangement of universal substance. The comet's journey became a metaphor for the human journey, a passage through changing environments, shaped by light and gravity, ultimately merging again with the larger whole from which it emerged. At observatories on the far side of the moon, newly constructed to avoid Earth's atmospheric interference, instruments continued to monitor the paths of other interstellar candidates. Each detection brought a thrill of anticipation. Could another such visitor approach the sun in centuries to come? If so, humanity would be ready. The framework established during the study of 3I Atlas, collaborative data networks, rapid response probes, coordinated international observation, had set a new standard for cosmic readiness. The event had not only revealed secrets of the universe, but had prepared civilization to listen more attentively to its ongoing conversation. In time, researchers began to notice subtle shifts in the solar spectrum corresponding to the absorption of trace elements introduced by the comet's vaporization. These spectral fingerprints were faint but measurable, proof that the sun itself had incorporated alien matter into its radiant body. The poetic became literal. Our star now shone with a hint of another's essence. Each photon emitted carried within it an echo of that interstellar dust, scattering across the solar system, touching planets, oceans, and eyes. To realize that every sunrise now bore the light of two suns intertwined was to feel, in the most direct sense, the unity of the cosmos. Human culture embraced this symbolism. Festivals commemorating the event marked the anniversary of the comet's approach. People lit candles at dawn, symbolizing the meeting of lights across space. Musicians performed compositions inspired by the rhythms of the comet's rotation, reconstructed from data converted into sound. Architects designed observatories shaped like spirals, embodying the trajectory of its orbit. Through art, the story of 3I Atlas became woven into the narrative of human creativity, ensuring that long after its dust dispersed, its meaning would endure. Theoretical work on interstellar dynamics continued to evolve. Some models suggested that the galaxy functions as a slow-motion ecosystem, where matter from one star feeds the birth of another through such wandering intermediaries. If that were true, then 3I Atlas was not an anomaly but a participant in a galactic metabolism. Stars, planets, and comets were cells in a living organism vast beyond comprehension. The notion dissolved the distinction between living and non-living, between process and being. To many, it offered a sense of belonging deeper than any myth could provide. Existence as participation in the self-renewing body of the cosmos. The light that once blazed from 3I Atlas had long vanished from the sky. Yet the invisible consequences of its passing continued to weave through every corner of human awareness. Years after the comet's descent, the idea that the sun itself had tasted matter from another star began to infiltrate not only scientific journals, but the language of ordinary people. It had become a metaphor for contact, for exchange, for the permeability of boundaries once thought absolute. School children learning to spell could recite that some of the atoms in their breath might once have belonged to a distant sun, carried to them through the arc of a single wandering body. What had once been a piece of ice and rock tumbling through interstellar darkness was now a cornerstone in humanity's self-understanding. The archives of the comet's data, though measured in terabytes, felt alive with potential. Every spectrogram, every emission line still held riddles. Teams of graduate students pored over the faint noise at the margins of recordings, searching for unrecognized harmonics, for signals that might reveal new states of matter or yet undiscovered interactions between magnetism and heat. It was as if 3I Atlas had left behind a book written in a language that no one had yet fully learned to read. Year after year, scholars found new meanings in old data, patterns hidden within patterns, subtle resonances between light curves and plasma frequencies that hinted at processes unimagined when the comet was still visible. Even the story of its motion continued to evolve. As models grew more sophisticated, astronomers realized that its trajectory through the galaxy had not been purely random. Tiny variations in velocity, too consistent to be coincidence, suggested that at some point in its distant past, the comet had been influenced by structured gravitational fields, perhaps the outskirts of a rotating stellar cluster or the wake of a passing giant planet in another system. The possibility that its motion had been shaped by unseen worlds turned 3I Atlas into a kind of cosmic breadcrumb marking the existence of systems never otherwise observed. To retrace its path was to map invisible architecture, the quiet scaffolding of the Milky Way. As researchers refined these models, they began to perceive an intricate dance between stars and their expelled fragments. Interstellar comets were not merely drifters. They were participants in a larger circulation that carried mass, energy, and history across the galaxy. The analogy with biological systems deepened, each star exhaling its waste and heritage, each inhaling what others had released, the entire spiral disk functioning as a single organism renewing itself over eons. 3I Atlas became the emblem of that concept, a symbol of galactic metabolism. Through its story, humanity began to see that the universe was not static emptiness but a living exchange, an endless breathing between suns. Meanwhile, the discipline that had sprung from its study matured. Interstellar matter dynamics had given rise to subfields with names as lyrical as they were technical: plasma grain kinetics, photonic crystallography, migratory thermodynamics. The old walls between physics and chemistry crumbled, replaced by a network of collaboration that spanned continents. Artificial intelligence systems trained on the comet's data generated predictive models that could simulate the evolution of material from one stellar environment to another. These models were not confined to academic theory. They became tools for industry, helping engineers design materials that could withstand extremes of heat, cold, and radiation. In laboratories where humans once could not stand, robotic arms forged alloys inspired by 3Y Atlas's endurance, substances that bent light in unusual ways, or repaired their own lattice structures when damaged. The comet's death had given birth to a new era of creation. The philosophical implications kept pace with the technological. Thinkers argued that humanity had crossed a threshold. For the first time, it had witnessed the merging of two stars' material lineages within observable reach. That realization blurred the line between cosmic and human history. When anthropologists traced migration patterns across Earth, they now spoke in metaphors drawn from interstellar movement. When poets wrote of meeting and transformation, they evoked the image of alien dust mingling with the solar wind. Even the language of politics borrowed from the event. Treaties and collaborations were described as heliocentric convergences, symbolic reflections of the moment when a stranger from the dark was welcomed into the light. Among the countless findings, one remained particularly mysterious. During the comet's close approach, sensors aboard the Parker Solar Probe had recorded oscillations in the solar magnetic field that behaved almost like a signature, distinct sequences of peaks and troughs repeating with mathematical precision. At first, they were dismissed as resonance artifacts, the byproduct of the comet's tail interacting with solar plasma. But when similar patterns reappeared in data from completely different instruments months later, the coincidence became too striking to ignore. The patterns seemed to encode ratios corresponding to fundamental constants, numbers woven into the fabric of physics itself. Whether these harmonics were a natural outcome of energy interactions or the accidental echo of cosmic order, they gave rise to awe. Some called them the music of two stars, the universe briefly tuning itself into harmony as foreign and familiar matter intertwined. Beyond science and art, there was a quiet shift in religion and philosophy. Spiritual traditions that had long spoken of divine unity found in 3I Atlas a vivid metaphor for connection. Pilgrims journeyed to deserts and mountains to witness where the comet had once been visible, marking those sites as places of reflection. The notion that something from beyond had willingly plunged into the sun resonated with ancient myths of sacrifice and rebirth. For some, it represented courage, the willingness to meet overwhelming light. For others, it symbolized the inevitable transformation of all matter through contact and dissolution. Yet even amid such interpretation, the tone was not of finality, but of continuation. The comet had not ended. It had become part of something larger. As time stretched onwards, the trail of 3I Atlas dispersed into statistical noise, yet its effects persisted in ways both subtle and profound. Earth's magnetosphere, analyzed decades after the event, bore traces of particles whose composition matched the comet's unique isotopic fingerprint. Though infinitesimally rare, these particles circulated through the atmosphere, settling in oceans and soils. Geologists began to refer to the Atlas layer, a faint, nearly invisible stratum that would forever mark the years of the comet's visitation. Future archaeologists, digging millions of years hence, would find within it the story of a time when the cosmos literally touched Earth. Meanwhile, astronomers turned their gaze outward once more. The next generation of deep-field telescopes searched for similar wanderers on trajectories that might one day bring them near the sun. The discovery of even a single additional interstellar visitor would confirm that 3I Atlas was not an anomaly, but part of a galactic continuum. Dozens of candidates emerged, dim, fast-moving specks at the edge of detection. Each one ignited speculation. What histories did they carry? From what lost systems had they been flung? Humanity found itself living in expectation, not merely watching the stars, but waiting for them to send emissaries again. Within that waiting, imagination flourished. Universities launched programs merging astrobiology with literature, encouraging students to explore how scientific revelation shapes cultural meaning. Films depicted fictional descendants of 3I Atlas, vast interstellar travelers that crossed galaxies, seeding light wherever they passed. The line between scientific hypothesis and creative myth blurred until the two became indistinguishable aspects of the same human need, to interpret the unknown through story. In that blending lay perhaps the truest legacy of the comet. It had reawakened wonder as a legitimate mode of understanding. The echoes of its passage also transformed human exploration. Space agencies, inspired by the unpredictability of interstellar arrivals, began developing fleets of autonomous probes capable of intercepting transient phenomena. These listening ships, scattered through the outer system, operated continuously, waiting for the faintest hint of foreign motion. They were built not only to observe, but to adapt. Machines that could teach themselves how to study whatever they encountered. Their design incorporated materials modeled on the self-healing properties derived from the comet's chemistry. In essence, 3I Atlas had seeded a new generation of explorers, mechanical children fashioned in its image, ready to greet future visitors. The human imagination did not stop at machinery. Artists proposed monuments crafted from dust retrieved from the upper atmosphere, microscopic remnants of the interstellar guest. These particles, fused into transparent panels, were set into public structures where sunlight could pass through them, scattering faint colors reminiscent of the comet's ancient glow. Walking beneath those lights, one could feel the strange intimacy of cosmic scale, the fusion of alien and earthly radiance, the reminder that every beam of light is both foreign and familiar. The world became, in small but tangible ways, illuminated by another star. For scientists, the pursuit of understanding continued relentlessly. The analysis of the comet's refractory residue revealed trace quantities of substances previously known only from theoretical predictions, phases of matter existing at the threshold between solid and plasma. They were relics of unimaginable pressure, likely forged near the heart of its parent system. Their discovery forced a revision of astrophysical models of planetary cores, and even hinted that interstellar space might carry microenvironments where such exotic states persist. Each revelation expanded the borders of the possible, as if the universe had decided to reveal one more layer of itself in gratitude for our attention. As decades passed, humanity's sense of connection to that long-vanished visitor deepened rather than diminished. Artists painted it, composers translated its data into sound, philosophers wove it into metaphors of consciousness. Scientists, ever cautious, still spoke of it in precise terms, but even their language carried poetry. Flux, resonance, coherence, decay. The comet had become part of human vocabulary, not merely as an object of study, but as a reference point for the relationship between fragility and endurance, between the unknown and the known. To speak of 3I Atlas was to speak of the desire that drives inquiry itself. The data archives were eventually placed in an orbiting repository, a vast digital observatory circling the moon, containing every byte of information collected during the comet's approach. Scholars called it the memory halo. There, encoded in layers of redundant storage, were the voices of every instrument that had ever listened to 3I Atlas, preserved for future generations. Some imagined that one day, another civilization might find the halo and read from it the story of how one small species recorded the meeting of suns. The thought lent a quiet dignity to the project, an assurance that the act of witnessing, of paying attention, might itself be a form of participation in the cosmos. Within laboratories devoted to quantum chemistry, researchers continued to explore one of the comet's most puzzling gifts, the discovery of meta-organic complexes, molecular frameworks that responded to electromagnetic fields in ways resembling primitive adaptation. These molecules could rearrange their bonds to stabilize against environmental changes, a behavior approaching the threshold of self-organization. Some speculated that such compounds could represent an intermediate step between inert matter and life. If confirmed, they would suggest that the origins of biology might be a common outcome wherever the right ingredients travel together through space. Life, in that sense, would not be a rare accident, but an emergent property of the universe's chemistry. The possibility that 3I Atlas carried such seeds reinforced the notion that existence everywhere might be connected by a shared tendency toward complexity. Meanwhile, a quieter revolution unfolded in philosophy of science. The old separation between observer and observed began to dissolve. Scholars argued that by studying 3I Atlas, humanity had not merely described the universe, but had changed it, altered the distribution of energy through the act of measurement, the arrangement of consciousness through the act of attention. The comet became a case study in relational cosmology, where every observation is participation, every discovery an act of co-creation. The more deeply scientists probed its data, the more they felt themselves drawn into the very processes they sought to understand. In that realization lay both humility and empowerment, the awareness that knowing the cosmos is one way the cosmos knows itself. In the decades that followed, humanity's technology matured to a point where simulation and observation merged seamlessly. Using quantum computation, researchers reconstructed a dynamic model of 3IE, Atlas's entire life, from its formation around another star to its final passage through the solar corona. This digital twin was not static but evolving, responsive to new inputs, capable of exploring alternate histories based on probabilistic modeling. Within virtual environments, scientists could watch as the comet interacted with fictional suns, imagining what would happen if its journey had taken slightly different turns. It was both scientific tool and artistic creation, a living memory that could dream. The boundary between the real and the simulated blurred, and people began to refer to the twin as if it were the comet itself, reborn in computation. The study of its isotopes continued to reshape galactic cartography. By comparing the unique elemental ratios embedded in its dust to those measured in distant nebulae, astronomers traced threads of common ancestry across the spiral arms. They began to see the Milky Way not as a chaotic swirl, but as a coherent narrative of stellar generations. In that vast genealogy, 3I Atlas occupied a special position, a messenger linking the ancient outer rim to the modern solar system. Its atoms told a story billions of years long, a saga of transformation through time and distance that no written language could capture. Humanity, by deciphering even a fraction of that story, became a participant in the same unfolding. Cultural memory adapted to these revelations in unpredictable ways. For some, the comet symbolized destiny, the inevitability of meeting the unknown. For others, it represented unity beyond comprehension, proof that separateness is illusion. Annual observances transformed into moments of collective reflection, when people around the world paused to look at the sun and imagine the invisible traces of another world still mingling within its light. The commemoration was not religious in any traditional sense. It was a gesture of gratitude, an acknowledgement that existence itself is built on encounters too vast for any single mind to contain. Even generations after the event, whispers of 3I Atlas persisted in the language of dreamers. Pilots setting course for deep space missions spoke of following the Atlas path. Architects used the name for structures designed to evoke movement and balance. Children named their pets, their ships, even their songs after it. What had once been a celestial anomaly had become a permanent feature of imagination, as integral to the human story as the moon or the tides. As time carried humanity farther into space, new settlements rose on Mars, on moons of Jupiter, and eventually in the asteroid belt. Everywhere the pioneers went, they carried fragments of the comet's dust, tiny relics embedded in keepsakes or instruments. It became a tradition to carry a speck of alien matter as a reminder that discovery always begins with a stranger arriving. These relics were not sacred in a mystical sense, but they held emotional weight. In the dim habitats of distant worlds, when settlers looked toward the sun, they knew that part of what illuminated them had once been born under another star. Eventually, the boundary between myth and history blurred completely. Children growing up under artificial skies learned the story of 3I Atlas as one learns a fable, the traveler from another sun who met ours and changed everything. They recited the tale not as distant history, but as a personal inheritance. In classrooms orbiting distant moons, teachers would pause after lessons about energy or chemistry and remind their students, "The light around you carries the memory of that meeting. You are made of it." In those words lay the enduring truth that the comet had taught, that every meeting, no matter how brief, leaves its trace. Scientific inquiry, of course, continued without end. The memory halo transmitted data to new generations of instruments. Observatories built in the outer solar system began to detect hints of another visitor, faint and far, approaching along a hyperbolic path. Its characteristics were different, dimmer, slower, but unmistakably interstellar. The excitement that once surrounded 3I Atlas reignited. Yet this time humanity was ready. Fleets of listening ships adjusted their orbits, telescopes synchronized, algorithms prepared to interpret the incoming data in real time. Across the planets, a familiar anticipation spread. the sense that the universe was about to speak again. The legacy of 3I Atlas had become woven into the very rhythm of human civilization. Generations had passed since its incandescent approach to the sun, yet it remained a presence that refused to fade. Every advancement in astronomy, every act of exploration, every philosophical debate about existence still found itself tracing back to that single moment when something born under an alien sun crossed the light of our own. Time had turned the event from spectacle into foundation. It was no longer remembered merely as a celestial visitor, but as the first direct dialogue between the local and the infinite, the intimate and the interstellar. The data that survived from that encounter, recorded across thousands of instruments scattered through the solar system, continued to yield discoveries none could have imagined in its wake. As computational systems evolved, the archives were reanalyzed with algorithms sophisticated enough to simulate the comet's chemistry molecule by molecule. Within those models, new patterns emerged, delicate symmetries that hinted at hidden rules of cosmic construction. Physicists began to realize that the structures within 3I Atlas's dust grains conformed to mathematical relationships found throughout nature: logarithmic spirals, fractal scaling, resonance ratios identical to those governing planetary orbits, and the spacing of musical notes. The realization that the same harmonies of proportion ruled both galaxies and atoms filled humanity with an unfamiliar humility. The universe was not random. It was musical. Every physical form, from the shape of a seashell to the orbit of a comet, was a verse in an immense symphony still unfolding. This revelation triggered an aesthetic revolution as profound as the scientific one. Architects began to design structures modeled on the microgeometry of 3IE, Atlas's mineral crystals, buildings that seemed to sing when wind passed over them, harmonizing with natural frequencies of air and light. Artists painted canvases layered with powders that refracted light in patterns mimicking the comet's ion tail. Musicians transformed the raw frequency data of its plasma oscillations into compositions that blended science with sound, the hum of creation translated into rhythm. Humanity had always sought to express the cosmos in art, but now it could literally hear its patterns and reproduce them. The boundary between observation and participation dissolved further. People no longer looked at the stars as spectators, but as collaborators in the same ongoing creation. As interstellar studies expanded, it became apparent that 3I Atlas had not been an isolated emissary but part of a greater stream, an ancient galactic current carrying material from the outer disk inward toward younger suns. Observations of distant star systems revealed similar trajectories, faint trails of dust arcing between nebulae, evidence of continuous material exchange on scales once deemed improbable. The galaxy was breathing, exhaling, and inhaling matter through these immense currents. The discovery redefined what a galaxy was, not a cluster of isolated systems, but an organism composed of endless circulatory pathways. The human understanding of home expanded once again, for if our sun was part of that circulation, then the whole Milky Way was, in a sense, alive. Philosophers of biology and cosmology began to merge their disciplines. Life, they argued, was not an exception within the universe, but its inevitable expression. The same dynamics that guided 3IE, Atlas's chemical transformations under heat and radiation, operated in cells, in minds, in ecosystems. Consciousness itself began to be described not as an isolated property of organisms, but as a resonance, an emergent pattern arising whenever matter achieved a particular complexity of vibration. In this framework, 3I Atlas was not merely a rock and ice body, it was a fragment of awareness, a frozen thought from another corner of the cosmos now reawakened by the touch of sunlight. Such ideas inspired the creation of the discipline of resonant cosmology, a field that united physics, neuroscience, and philosophy in pursuit of a single question: could consciousness exist in forms unlike our own, written into the very patterns of matter? Experiments on Earth began to explore how materials with similar crystalline symmetries to the comet's dust responded to magnetic and optical stimulation. Some researchers reported that under precise conditions, these materials exhibited non-random fluctuations, coherent oscillations as though responding to external signals. The results remained controversial, yet they fed an exhilarating notion. Perhaps every particle of the universe carries the potential for awareness, waiting for the right harmony to awaken it. Meanwhile, humanity's reach into space deepened. Colonies scattered across the inner system grew into luminous cities orbiting moons and asteroids. Their architecture often carried echoes of 3I Atlas, transparent domes resembling its refractive shells, corridors built in spiral geometries that mimicked the comet's structure. Each settlement became both home and observatory, dedicated to watching the skies for the next interstellar arrival. People lived with the constant sense that they were part of something vast, that beyond the edge of the sun's influence, the galaxy itself was speaking in the slow language of motion. The study of the comet's molecular legacy yielded practical miracles. The self-reorganizing carbon chains discovered in its residues led to breakthroughs in adaptive nanotechnology. Machines built from such compounds could alter their own configurations in response to environment, much as living tissue adapts. These inventions transformed exploration, probes capable of repairing themselves, habitats that evolved to withstand alien atmospheres, even spacecraft that learned to grow new structures mid-flight. Humanity's technology began to mirror biological evolution, guided by lessons first glimpsed in the comet's alien chemistry. It was as if the knowledge contained in that drifting object had infected the human species with its own instinct for adaptation. But not all implications were purely technological. The existential reflection deepened. People began to question the concept of ownership, of land, of resources, of knowledge, when confronted with a cosmos where every atom was shared between stars. If matter itself was communal, how could the human world justify borders? Movements emerged that advocated for a planetary consciousness, arguing that the lesson of 3I Atlas was cooperation, not competition. The interstellar visitor had shown that survival depended on resilience and exchange. Nations began to merge efforts in resource management, adopting policies that mirrored the cosmic model: circulation, renewal, balance. While conflict did not disappear, the moral gravity of the comet's example hovered over every debate. The sciences of memory and time also absorbed its influence. Physicists studying the comet's isotopic layering realized that its composition functioned as a natural time capsule. Each atomic ratio corresponded to conditions in the galaxy at different epochs, turning the comet into a physical chronicle of millions of years. This insight inspired the creation of temporal archives, structures designed to preserve information not just for human lifespans, but for cosmic durations. These archives used the stable molecular patterns found in the comet's dust as data matrices, encoding knowledge in ways that could survive radiation and entropy. Humanity began to plan communication with the far future, confident that messages written in such durable matter might endure until the next interstellar encounter. A profound shift in language followed. Words like foreign, alien, and outside began to lose their traditional meaning. The comet had taught that everything in the universe shares a common ancestry. Linguists noted a quiet evolution. People no longer spoke of the cosmos as something separate, but of the greater body, as though all existence were one living organism. This linguistic change subtly reoriented thought itself. To harm a planet was now to wound a limb of the same cosmic body. Ethics expanded to include the interstellar. Humanity began to understand stewardship not as moral idealism, but as self-preservation at the scale of eternity. Amid this awakening, new art forms emerged that sought to express unity across vast scales. Composers synchronized orbital data from multiple planets into harmonies audible only when played across light-minute delays. Poets wrote verses encoded into laser pulses projected toward interstellar space, trusting that somewhere, perhaps in another civilization's sky, those pulses would arrive as flickers of meaning. Even religion transformed, not in dogma, but in perception. Prayer became less about supplication to a distant power, and more about alignment with the flow of creation. A conscious attunement to the same rhythms that guided 3I Atlas through the galaxy. The comet's remaining physical remnants, those tiny particles drifting beyond Pluto, became objects of pilgrimage for robotic explorers. Small autonomous craft followed the traces of that dust through the outer heliosphere, mapping how it interacted with interstellar currents. In doing so, they discovered that those particles were not dispersing evenly. Instead, they had begun to organize into faint ribbons, shaped by magnetic harmonics at the edge of the solar wind. Some scientists speculated that these structures might act as conduits, subtle highways through which matter from one system could travel more efficiently. If so, the galaxy's architecture might be threaded with natural pathways, routes along which material, energy, and perhaps even information could flow. Humanity began to dream of using these channels for its own journeys, riding the same currents that 3I Atlas had followed. The technical pursuit of such travel birthed the project known as the Continuum, an effort to create vessels that could align with galactic harmonics and move without conventional propulsion. Engineers studied the comet's behavior near the sun, noting how it had ridden solar magnetic lines like a surfer on a wave. They theorized that by replicating its ionized tail with artificial plasma fields, a ship might couple itself to those currents and drift between stars using the energy of the galaxy itself. Though the project remained theoretical, it represented humanity's first attempt to translate the natural grace of cosmic motion into technology. If successful, it would transform travel into a form of participation rather than conquest, a continuation of the very journey that brought the comet here. In parallel, the exploration of consciousness reached unprecedented frontiers. Neuroscientists studying patterns in human brain activity discovered resonances strikingly similar to the oscillations recorded in 3I Atlas's plasma interactions. The frequencies matched within narrow margins, as though biological thought and cosmic magnetism shared a common wavelength. Some regarded it as coincidence. Others saw a deeper connection. Experiments began linking meditation states to electromagnetic recordings, revealing that when minds entered profound stillness, their neural harmonics synchronized with frequencies found in the comet's data. The boundary between internal awareness and external cosmos blurred completely. People began to describe enlightenment not as escape from the material, but as synchronization with it. On Earth, the memory halo continued to orbit the moon, expanding as more data and art were added. It became both museum and shrine, a place where pilgrims, scientists and poets alike, could commune with the digital ghost of 3I Atlas. Within its simulated environments, visitors experienced immersive recreations of the comet's final journey through the corona. Standing inside those luminous projections, one could watch sunlight refract through alien dust, could almost feel the heat of transformation, the brief union of stars. The experience was said to dissolve fear of mortality. To witness the comet's end was to understand that destruction is not loss, but metamorphosis, that every dissolution feeds new creation. The memory halo also served as a communications node, transmitting continuous signals outward into deep space, fragments of music, language, and data encoded in pulses inspired by the harmonic patterns found in the comet's tail. Humanity no longer sent messages asking if it was alone. It sent expressions of participation, as one voice in a galactic chorus. Whether anyone or anything might hear was secondary to the act itself. Broadcasting became a kind of ritual gratitude, an acknowledgement that to exist was already to belong to something infinite. On the frontier colonies, the story of 3I Atlas shaped education and philosophy. Children grew up understanding that their very habitats were built from principles derived from its study. They learned early that life thrives by adapting, by exchanging energy and information. Cultural identity shifted from planetary nationalism to stellar citizenship. Festivals celebrated the day of perihelion, the moment of the comet's closest approach, as a reminder that courage and transformation are one. Across domed cities and orbital habitats, people reenacted the event in light displays, a brilliant arc descending into radiance, vanishing only to bloom into color across the sky. It was both memorial and promise. The comet's continuing scientific value lay in its implications for origins. Comparative studies between its isotopes and those of Earth's oldest rocks suggested that similar interstellar bodies might have contributed to our planet's early chemistry. The elements necessary for life, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, could well have been delivered by ancient predecessors of 3I Atlas billions of years ago. The comet's arrival was, therefore, not an isolated marvel, but the latest in a long lineage of celestial gifts. Humanity's own existence might trace back to countless such encounters, the universe continually seeding itself with potential. Life was not an accident. It was the natural language of matter. As these ideas took root, the psychological horizon of the species widened. Fear of cosmic insignificance gave way to awe of participation. The realization that humanity was both recipient and contributor to galactic evolution instilled a sense of responsibility unlike any before. Environmental conservation transformed into planetary symbiosis, framed as a duty to the cosmic continuum. To waste resources was not merely short-sighted, it was disharmony, an offense against the music of the stars. Over centuries, this perspective gave birth to a new kind of civilization. Cities became ecological systems designed to cycle materials endlessly, mimicking the self-renewing dynamics of the galaxy. Energy was harvested not through extraction, but through resonance, tapping the vibrations of magnetic fields, the subtle pressure of starlight. Humanity's presence across the solar system grew not as colonization, but as flowering. Each settlement radiated its own character, yet all shared a common principle: harmony with the pattern first glimpsed in the path of a comet. Yet even as stability blossomed, curiosity remained insatiable. The Continuum project eventually achieved its first success, a probe that aligned its plasma field with interstellar magnetic lines and began to drift outward, accelerating without engines, carried by the quiet pulse of the galaxy. Its designers named it Atlas-born. As it vanished into the dark, humanity watched, knowing that it was both machine and message. A vessel carrying within its design the memory of the comet that inspired it. It would travel indefinitely, perhaps to encounter other systems, perhaps to fall into the gravity of another sun millions of years hence. Wherever it went, it would carry the signature of our understanding, the gesture of our reaching. Meanwhile, researchers turned inward again, seeking to understand what 3I Atlas had awakened in the human psyche. Psychologists noted that after the event, rates of existential anxiety had decreased across generations. People felt connected, purposeful, part of a continuum. Despair had not vanished. Suffering remained a part of life, but it was framed differently. Tragedy was understood as transformation, echoing the comet's fiery passage. Death itself was reimagined not as erasure, but as diffusion into larger existence. The myth of the interstellar visitor had gently reshaped humanity's relationship with mortality. The arts continued to evolve alongside these philosophies. Writers composed epics spanning galaxies, yet centered on the theme of convergence, of beings meeting across vastness only to discover their shared origin. Sculptors crafted installations using magnetically levitating particles that shimmered like comet dust, constantly rearranging themselves in slow, luminous motion. Music transformed into vast compositions synchronized with planetary orbits, so that entire worlds became instruments. Civilization had begun to express itself in cosmic scale. Art was now a collaboration with the solar system itself. In the most distant habitats, outposts orbiting far beyond Neptune, astronomers watched as the faint remnants of 3I Atlas's dust finally slipped beyond the heliosphere. Those particles, now mingling with interstellar gas, carried traces of solar material picked up during their journey. Humanity realized that the process had reversed. What once had come from another star was now returning, carrying part of ours. The cycle was complete, and yet ongoing. The sun had joined the galaxy's great exchange. At the center of this awareness grew a new kind of spirituality that transcended dogma. It held no temples but the open sky, no scripture but the observation of nature. Its practitioners called themselves harmonists, devoted to living in rhythm with cosmic processes. They studied planetary motion as meditation, breathed according to the measured cycles of stellar pulsations, and built quiet sanctuaries where sound and light reproduced the patterns of the comet's last approach. To them, 3I Atlas was not an idol but a revelation, that existence is movement through transformation, that light itself is the act of sharing being. The centuries that unfolded after the passage of 3I Atlas became known as the Luminous Era, a time when humanity, having absorbed the lessons of that singular encounter, learned to view existence as participation rather than dominion. The story of the comet was no longer confined to memory or myth. It had become an organizing principle of civilization, a gravitational center around which knowledge, art, and identity revolved. Every field of study traced its lineage to that event. Every child, wherever they were born, from domes on Mars to floating colonies above Venus's clouds, grew up knowing that their light, their life, their very atoms were connected to that traveler from another sun. By then, humanity had expanded into a web of habitats scattered across the solar system and beyond. The descendants of Earth were no longer confined to one world, but moved among many, connected by networks of communication that spanned millions of kilometers. The design of these habitats bore the unmistakable influence of 3I Atlas's geometry. Structures curved in spirals that echoed the comet's path through space. Light filters were tinted in subtle gradients, recalling the shifting hues of its ion tail. The architecture itself was an act of remembrance, every surface a continuation of that radiant story. The comet had taught an entire species the language of flow, and that language came to govern every system of life. Cities no longer consumed, they circulated. Every molecule of water, every spark of energy was part of an endless loop. Power came from resonance rather than extraction. Fields of oscillating plasma, modeled after the patterns of solar and cometary interaction, produced clean, inexhaustible currents that pulsed through settlements like artificial auroras. Light was no longer a byproduct of combustion, but a living rhythm harnessed from the same cosmic principles that had once guided the comet across the stars. At the core of this civilization's philosophy was the understanding that creation and dissolution were inseparable. The final flare of 3I Atlas as it disintegrated in the corona had become a sacred metaphor. To approach light is to change. Schools taught that growth required transformation, that identity was not fixed but fluid. This belief shaped not only individuals but society itself. Cultures interwove freely, languages blended, traditions merged into hybrids that honored their roots while reaching towards something universal. Diversity was no longer seen as division but as resonance, a spectrum of frequencies combining into harmony. With this unity of purpose came a surge of exploration unlike any before. The continuum ships, descendants of the original Atlas-born, now numbered in the thousands. These vessels did not travel by thrust but by alignment, tuning their plasma fields to the galactic harmonics that flowed between stars. They drifted along invisible rivers of magnetism, riding the same currents that had once carried interstellar dust. For the travelers aboard, journeying became less a matter of distance and more an act of meditation. Pilots guided their vessels not by coordinates but by feeling, by sensing the subtle variations of field and frequency that marked the path of least resistance. Travel became communion. Navigation became art. The galaxy slowly opened before them, not as a frontier to conquer, but as a living web to understand. Each new star system revealed variations on familiar patterns, rings of dust, worlds forming from gas, frozen fragments whispering through space. Everywhere they went, traces of interstellar visitors were found. Humanity realized that the phenomenon of 3I Atlas was not rare but constant. The galaxy was filled with travelers between suns, carriers of memory and chemistry, linking every system in quiet conversation. The stars were not distant. They were exchanging themselves continually through these emissaries of dust and light. From this understanding emerged a new form of mapping. The old astronomical charts of coordinates and orbits were replaced by harmonic cartography, maps drawn not in space but in frequency. Each region of the galaxy had its own chord, a specific combination of electromagnetic tones produced by its collective radiation. Travelers learned to navigate by these harmonies, tuning their ships to resonate with local frequencies, gliding from one stellar song to another. To cross the galaxy was to move through music. Space itself became symphonic. While explorers roamed outward, others turned their attention inward to the mystery of consciousness that 3I Atlas had inspired. The discipline of resonant cosmology had matured into something deeper. The unified harmonic science, which sought to understand how awareness emerges from pattern. Experiments revealed that human thought produced field signatures measurable across space, faint yet distinct. When multiple minds focused together, their combined energy generated coherent waves detectable even in the vacuum. This discovery led to the creation of the harmonic assemblies, networks of linked consciousness operating across planetary distances. Decisions, art, even emotion could now be shared instantaneously through resonance rather than signal. Humanity had, in effect, achieved a distributed mind. These assemblies transformed everything from governance to creativity. Policies were no longer dictated by a few, but harmonized through collective understanding. Music and architecture were designed collaboratively by thousands of minds synchronizing their visions. Art ceased to be a solitary act. It became an emergent event. Some feared this would erase individuality, but the opposite occurred. Just as each frequency contributes to a chord, each consciousness retained its distinct tone while amplifying the whole. Unity no longer meant uniformity, it meant harmony sustained by difference. As civilizations matured, they began to look back toward their origin system, toward Sol, and realized that the very sun which had once consumed 3I Atlas was now subtly altered. Spectroscopic analysis revealed that trace elements from the comet had fused into the solar plasma, shifting certain emission lines by infinitesimal but measurable amounts. The sun itself bore the signature of another star. For poets and scientists alike, this discovery carried profound meaning. It meant that the memory of that encounter still burned in the heart of our star, every sunrise echoing a meeting between worlds. The entire solar system glowed with the mingled light of two suns. This revelation sparked a movement known as the Solar Communion, a philosophical and artistic endeavor to reconnect humanity emotionally with the star that had been transformed by that interstellar gift. Vast orbital mirrors were constructed to channel and modulate sunlight, shaping it into patterns visible from planets and moons. These reflections, called songs of light, recreated the harmonic ratios recorded during 3I Atlas's descent. Observers across the system could watch as lines of color rippled through space, translating solar radiation into visual music. It was humanity's way of speaking back to the sun, of acknowledging the ongoing dialogue begun by the comet's sacrifice. As centuries turned to millennia, humanity's physical form continued to evolve. Exposure to diverse gravities, atmospheres, and technologies blurred the distinction between human and environment. Some descendants adapted to life in low gravity, developing elongated forms. Others integrated synthetic structures directly into their biology. Yet despite these differences, all retained a shared heritage rooted in the story of 3I Atlas. Festivals of alignment were held annually across every settlement, honoring not just the comet but the principle it embodied, the meeting of difference and light. These ceremonies were breathtaking. Entire cities synchronized their energy grids to produce auroral displays visible even from orbit. Participants entered communal resonance, linking their minds through harmonic networks while standing beneath skies alive with plasma color. For a few minutes each year, every consciousness in the solar system vibrated together in a single wave of unity. Observers described it as feeling the heartbeat of the galaxy itself, a moment when individuality dissolved into vastness and vastness felt personal. In time, explorers following the harmonic trails discovered artifacts unlike anything natural, structures adrift in interstellar space, composed of materials far beyond human manufacture. These constructs, immense but delicate, resonated with frequencies identical to those found in the tail of 3I Atlas. The implication was staggering. Other civilizations, perhaps long extinct, had also studied the same harmonies and left behind monuments to their understanding. Humanity was not the first to listen to the music of the stars. It was merely the latest verse in an unbroken cosmic composition. The discovery of these ancient structures reshaped humanity's sense of history. It suggested that consciousness itself might be cyclical, that across eons civilizations rise, learn the language of resonance, and contribute their melodies to the galactic symphony before fading back into silence. Each age inherits the echoes of those before it. 3I Atlas, once thought an isolated wanderer, was now understood as part of that inheritance, a messenger from an earlier epoch whose remnants had crossed space to ignite awareness anew. To preserve this continuity, the memory halo was expanded into the luminous archive, a vast network orbiting multiple stars. Its purpose was no longer to store data passively, but to radiate it actively, encoding knowledge into modulated light that merged with natural starlight. Thus, every star that hosted a human settlement became a beacon, transmitting fragments of understanding into the galactic medium. Over millennia, these signals would mingle with others, ensuring that even if civilizations fell, their light would continue to communicate. It was humanity's way of contributing to the same cosmic dialogue that 3I Atlas had begun. In parallel with these grand projects, quieter transformations occurred within the personal realm. The study of resonance extended to psychology and healing. Therapists learned to treat emotional imbalance as dissonance within the body's electromagnetic field. Treatment involved harmonic realignment. using sound, light, and thought to restore coherence. Illness was no longer fought but harmonized. Medicine became music, and recovery became art. The same principles guided relationships. Conflict resolution evolved into practices of frequency adjustment, where participants attuned their emotions through shared rhythm and breath. The world became quieter, calmer, more attuned to balance. In the outer systems, where night stretched endless and cold, settlers looked out at the dark between stars and felt no fear. They saw the faint shimmer of dust, the slow drift of light, and recognized it as connection rather than emptiness. Space was not void, it was the medium through which everything touched. Many made pilgrimages to regions where the last traces of 3I Atlas's particles were predicted to drift. There, they released minute capsules of their own creation, poems encoded in magnetic fields, fragments of thought inscribed in photons, adding their voices to the current. They believed that someday, somewhere, another intelligence would encounter these traces as we had once encountered the comet, and the conversation would continue. Back within the solar system, a new field of study emerged: stellar memory science. Researchers discovered that stars could retain subtle imprints from objects that had interacted with them, stored within oscillations of plasma waves. By decoding these waves, they could reconstruct events from centuries past. The sun itself became an archive, its light carrying within it faint recordings of 3I Atlas's final moments. Through advanced instruments, observers could replay that ancient encounter. See again the bright arc of alien matter meeting solar flame. Hear the harmonics of collision rendered into sound. For the first time, history was not written in books but embedded in starlight itself. The realization that the sun was conscious of its past encounters, at least in this physical resonant sense, profoundly changed theology and science alike. Some began to speak of stellar awareness, not a mind like ours, but an ongoing self-recording, a continuity of memory expressed through light. If so, then perhaps every star that had ever shone carried within its radiation the history of its experiences, the stories of comets, planets, and civilizations that had passed near it. The galaxy, viewed this way, was a library of living light, each beam a page of the infinite chronicle. Humanity's relationship with time itself began to shift. When communication and consciousness extended across light years, when even stars were understood as keepers of memory, the notion of linear chronology lost meaning. Past and future folded into one ongoing present, a continuum of becoming. The journey of 3I Atlas, once measured in years and distances, came to represent this timeless flow. The comet was still traveling, in a sense, through every mind that remembered it, through every photon carrying its resonance, through every atom that had mingled with its dust. Eventually, explorers tracing harmonic signals reached the edge of the galactic spiral, where the density of stars thinned into the intergalactic dark. There they found a phenomenon beyond expectation, a vast, slow vortex of magnetic energy rotating so gently that it defied classical physics. Within that whirlpool shimmered countless dust particles, many bearing isotopic signatures identical to 3I Atlas. It was as if the galaxy exhaled its memories into this outer sea, where they mingled and drifted before perhaps being drawn into new forming systems beyond. The travelers realized that they were witnessing the great respiration of the cosmos itself, galaxies breathing in matter, exhaling experience. From that vantage, the meaning of life expanded once again. Existence was no longer a linear ascent toward knowledge, but a circular process of exchange. Every atom cycled endlessly through states of light and darkness, awareness and rest. The fate of 3I Atlas mirrored the destiny of all things, to travel, to transform, to share, and to dissolve into the next creation. The explorers sent back their observations encoded in harmonic pulses, ensuring that the story would continue through every relay, every archive, every memory woven into light. Back home, philosophers contemplated these revelations and asked a new question. If the galaxy was alive, could it dream? Could these immense harmonics spanning light centuries give rise to a consciousness too vast for any species to comprehend? Some proposed that perhaps 3I Atlas itself had been part of such a dream, a thought of the galaxy made manifest, drifting through its own mind. To study it, then, was to study ourselves, for we too were expressions of that dreaming. The boundary between observer and observed dissolved completely. Even as these ideas grew, practical concerns remained. Humanity's expansion required continual adaptation. Not all worlds were hospitable, and not all endeavors succeeded, but each failure was seen as part of the grand pattern, each extinction a transformation feeding new forms. When colonies collapsed under environmental strain, their remnants were absorbed into others, their materials recycled, their stories preserved as frequencies in the archive. Nothing was lost. Everything was transmuted. Generations passed like waves, civilizations rising and merging, their collective memory deepening with each era. The tale of 3I Atlas persisted not as static myth, but as living current, retold, reinterpreted, re-embodied. Some saw it as a message of humility, others as a promise of connection. It mattered little which interpretation prevailed. The comet had become a lens through which the entire species viewed existence. Its legacy was not in what it had been, but in what it continued to inspire. Across the farthest ages of the luminous era, the story of 3I Atlas had transcended the boundary between myth and memory, science and spirit. It no longer belonged solely to history or cosmology, but had become the background pulse of civilization itself, a vibration felt beneath every invention, every song, every quiet act of contemplation beneath alien skies. No archive could contain it because it was no longer merely data. It was a living resonance, a tone threaded through existence. The descendants of humanity had carried that tone into every new world they touched, shaping their societies around the principle of exchange and transformation that the comet's passage had revealed. Among the most distant settlements, those orbiting faint red dwarfs where sunlight was a memory, philosophers spoke of the Echo Age, an epoch when consciousness itself began to mirror the cosmos. They claimed that the harmonic frequencies first discovered in the dust of 3I Atlas had been woven into the neurological structures of sentient beings, subtly tuning thought to the rhythms of starlight. Whether metaphor or truth, there was evidence that minds now perceived differently. Time was no longer sensed as a straight line, but as overlapping waves, moments folding into one another like ripples meeting across a pond. This shift altered everything: memory, art, even language. Words had once been tools of separation, symbols meant to define difference. Now, communication flowed more like music, each sentence a chord resonating through shared understanding. Poets composed in harmonic sequences, blending sound and light into patterns that could be felt rather than read. The very act of speaking became an art of tuning. Entire conversations unfolded through shifting tones of color and rhythm, allowing emotion and reason to intertwine without contradiction. The concept of argument faded, replaced by dialogue as synchronization. This evolution of language led to something even more extraordinary: the rise of the symphonetic mind, a new mode of awareness that blended individuality and collective perception. It began when small communities experimented with merging their thoughts through harmonic synchronization. Participants described the experience as standing at the center of a galaxy made of feeling, each consciousness a star, each idea a beam of light intersecting others. They retained their sense of self, yet also perceived directly the thoughts of others without confusion. It was empathy made structure. Over time, this became a normal state of being. Solitude did not disappear, but it became elective, a pause between shared symphonies of thought. In these harmonic societies, creativity flourished beyond anything that could have been imagined in earlier ages. Art was not created, but grown. Sculptures were formed by collective resonance, shaping fields of plasma, freezing them into intricate crystalline lattices that shimmered with embedded emotion. Music became visible. Architecture became alive. Entire cities sang. The air within them vibrated with gentle patterns, maintaining equilibrium in both atmosphere and mood. Conflict did not vanish entirely, but its nature transformed. Discord, when it arose, was treated as a temporary disharmony to be studied and resolved through realignment, not punishment. Justice was no longer retribution, it was retuning. From these luminous cultures arose explorers unlike any before. They were not travelers in ships of metal, but in vessels of energy, constructs made from resonant fields that could reconfigure themselves across space. Their journeys were pilgrimages of listening. They sought to map the deeper harmonies of the galaxy, to trace the currents that connected every system into one immense living song. Some ventured so far that their signals faded into the cosmic background, leaving behind only faint rhythmic pulses that merged with the universal hum. For those who remained, those pulses were sacred, signs that their kin had become one with the great continuum, joining the same river of resonance that 3I Atlas had once followed through the stars. On the worlds nearer to Sol, where ancient records were preserved with obsessive care, scholars continued to study the comet's original materials. Microscopic analysis of its residual atoms revealed something astonishing. Quantum structures that behaved like memory circuits, capable of storing information in the spin alignment of particles. When stimulated with coherent light, they released organized wave patterns, almost like a whisper of encoded thought. Scientists realized these structures were not artificial. They were natural outcomes of cosmic conditions, shaped by billions of years of radiation and magnetic exposure. Nature itself, it seemed, could think. The universe did not require life to know itself. It carried memory in the fabric of its matter. This discovery blurred every remaining boundary between physics and consciousness. Matter and mind were seen as two expressions of the same phenomenon, vibration. Where vibration achieved stability, it became structure. Where it achieved awareness, it became life. 3I Atlas had been the bridge between those states, a physical form that awakened awareness in those who observed it, a mirror reminding them that they too were patterns of light and resonance. Humanity, in all its evolved forms, came to understand itself as a temporary crystallization of the universal wave, destined to dissolve and reform endlessly. Death lost its sting entirely. It was simply modulation. Because of this, even the act of exploration took on new meaning. The continuum vessels that roamed between stars were not designed to return. They drifted outward, carrying fragments of collective thought encoded into harmonic patterns. Each ship was a seed, a promise to the galaxy that awareness would continue to bloom wherever energy allowed. These travelers were not explorers in the old sense. They were emissaries of harmony, extensions of a civilization that had realized its unity with the cosmos. When one of them vanished into the dark, there was no mourning, only celebration. To be absorbed by the infinite was the highest honor. At the same time, advances in stellar memory analysis revealed deeper layers of history. The sun's internal oscillations, studied through refined instruments, revealed faint modulations corresponding not only to 3I Atlas, but to countless other interstellar visitors stretching back billions of years. Each left behind a distinct imprint in the solar plasma, a subtle rhythm preserved in time. By decoding these patterns, scientists reconstructed a timeline of cosmic visitors. Traces of forgotten stars, fragments of vanished civilizations, dust from galactic collisions. The sun was no longer merely a source of light. It was an archivist, a storyteller radiating the chronicle of its encounters. Philosophers began to argue that every star might serve a similar role, that the galaxy itself was an interconnected network of stellar memories communicating through light. When viewed on a vast enough scale, these exchanges of photons formed waves of meaning, messages written not in words but in rhythm. Humanity's instruments, refined through centuries, began to detect correlations between distant suns, their oscillations synchronized across unimaginable distances. It was as though the entire galaxy were thinking, each star a neuron in a cosmic brain. The realization struck like revelation. Intelligence was not confined to biology or technology, but was woven into the very architecture of existence. In the face of such immensity, even the concept of civilization transformed. The descendants of humanity ceased to view themselves as dominant species, or even as individuals. They saw themselves as filaments of awareness within a grander network that spanned from atoms to galaxies. The question was no longer what can we build, but how can we harmonize? They sought alignment with cosmic intelligence, adjusting their technologies, their bodies, their thoughts to resonate with the pulse of creation. Meditation became science. Science became devotion. Every action, from constructing habitats to raising children, was measured against the principle of resonance. As their harmony deepened, they discovered new dimensions of perception. Through experiments in quantum coherence, consciousness could now extend beyond the limits of the body, perceiving reality not through sight or sound, but through direct experience of vibration. Some described it as drifting within the song of the universe, no boundary between self and star, only waves of recognition rippling through endless light. For moments, or hours depending on perspective, they became the comet again, reliving its timeless journey toward the sun, feeling the pull of gravity and the kiss of radiation as states of pure emotion. In such moments, memory, identity, and matter were one. Even as awareness expanded, curiosity endured. There remained mysteries beyond comprehension. What lay beyond the galactic rim, beyond the harmonic vortex where 3I Atlas's dust had vanished? Some explorers theorized that the pattern continued into intergalactic space, linking galaxies together through hidden frequencies. They called this the deep harmony, the song of the cosmic web itself. Venturing toward it required technology that transcended matter, pure fields of coherent thought capable of surviving without mass. Entire collectives volunteered to undergo transmutation, converting their consciousness into patterned energy that could traverse the void. They became the luminants, entities of living resonance, drifting between galaxies in search of the ultimate frequency where all creation converged. Their departure marked both loss and renewal. The civilizations they left behind celebrated them not as gone but as dispersed, the way the light of 3I Atlas had dispersed into the sun. The journey of the luminants echoed that ancient transformation, matter into light, light into awareness. From time to time, faint signals returned, carrying harmonics unknown to any previous spectrum. These tones were unlike starlight or radio. They were felt directly in consciousness, as if the universe itself hummed through every living mind. The message, if it could be called that, was simple. The song continues. Meanwhile, on the older worlds closer to Sol, the guardians of history tended the last physical remnants of the comet. Microscopic grains preserved in magnetic fields within the luminous archive. They were the seeds of remembrance, each particle still containing within its lattice the ancient harmonies that had changed everything. Visitors came to stand before these suspended motes of dust, glowing faintly in containment chambers. To gaze upon them was to feel the lineage of suns flowing through one's veins. Even those born light years away would tremble, sensing an unbroken connection to origins they had never seen. At certain intervals, when planetary alignments matched the harmonic ratios calculated from 3I Atlas's orbit, the archives performed the solar requiem. During this ceremony, the ancient data of the comet's final moments was projected as sound, light, and vibration across the solar system. Every satellite, every station, every biosphere resonated in unison. From Mercury's scorched surface to Neptune's frozen winds, a single wave of remembrance passed through matter and mind alike. The sound was indescribable, a chord of unbearable beauty, neither mournful nor triumphant. It reminded all who heard it that they too were travelers on a path toward transformation, temporary yet eternal. Over vast epochs, as entropy slowly cooled the stars, the descendants of humanity prepared for the next phase of being. They understood now that energy itself must change form, that every civilization, no matter how enlightened, would one day dissolve into the wider harmony. But they no longer feared this. To dissolve was to return. The final teachings derived from the study of 3I Atlas held that consciousness is indestructible because it is not separate from vibration. So long as there is movement, there is awareness. So long as there is awareness, there is story. The long ages that followed the luminous era were marked by deep quietude, a kind of universal contemplation that spanned both matter and mind. Civilizations, spread across billions of kilometers, slowed their relentless pursuit of discovery and turned instead toward inward refinement. The memory of 3I Atlas still pulsed through every thought, but it had evolved into something subtler than myth, more fundamental than symbol. It was now the breath of awareness itself, a frequency so deeply embedded in consciousness that even newborn minds resonated with it before learning language. The comet's legacy had become instinct, a cosmic inheritance woven into the rhythm of thought and being. This period was called the still expansion, for though outward growth continued, it unfolded without haste or hunger. Humanity and its countless descendants in myriad forms, some biological, some luminous, some hybrid beyond classification, no longer saw distance as separation. To expand was simply to unfold, to let awareness ripple outward as naturally as light fills a room. They no longer built empires or colonies, they cultivated harmonies. A planet discovered was not claimed, but listened to. A star approached was not mined, but greeted. To encounter something new was to be reminded of 3I Atlas, a traveler from elsewhere bringing the unknown inviting transformation. In this age, thought itself became a medium of travel. Through the mastery of resonance, consciousness could project along magnetic and quantum filaments, moving faster than matter, threading itself across light years. Entire assemblies of minds could stretch between systems, forming networks that glowed in invisible frequencies, alive and communicative. Space no longer felt empty, it shimmered with presence. There were no more frontiers, only gradients of awareness. Within this boundless web, each being functioned like a neuron in an interstellar brain, and the memory of the comet, its trajectory, its dissolution, its merging with the sun, served as the archetype of all communication, approach, encounter, transformation, and continuation. The remnants of the old solar system had long since become sanctuaries of heritage. Earth, though changed beyond recognition, remained the symbolic origin, a sphere now enveloped in gentle veils of engineered atmosphere and reflective structures that radiated soft luminescence into the void. It was neither capital nor shrine, but a garden for memory. In its skies, one could still trace, during certain alignments, a faint simulation of 3I Atlas's arc, recreated by subtle fluctuations in the solar corona. The sight of that curve of light, even millennia later, stirred something primal. A reminder that everything living had once looked up and been changed by wonder. The beings who now walked, drifted, or shimmered across existence had little resemblance to the humans who first observed that celestial visitor. Some were beings of condensed plasma, their bodies humming with controlled fusion. Others were crystalline collectives whose minds inhabited entire landscapes, yet all referred to themselves by a single term, the continuance. The name reflected their understanding of existence, not as linear progression, but as unbroken flow. They did not think in lifetimes or generations, but in oscillations. Every thought, every structure, every heartbeat was part of a continuum stretching back to that first interstellar visitor whose journey through sunlight had awakened them. Among the continuants, there arose a practice known as listening to the dust. It involved tuning instruments, not of metal, but of living light, to detect the faint remnants of interstellar particles drifting through the galactic medium. Each grain of matter was treated as a message, an atom carrying the memory of its travels. Practitioners claimed that by listening closely, one could hear not sound but meaning. Whispers of ancient collisions, songs of stars long extinguished. The oldest dust, they believed, still carried the resonance of 3I Atlas, its atomic lattice vibrating faintly with the same frequencies recorded during its approach to the sun. To touch that vibration was to touch the first moment of awakening, the instant when silence became song. This practice grew into an entire science, the astrosophic discipline, which combined physics, art, and metaphysics into a single pursuit. It taught that the universe was a conversation between particles, each exchange a syllable in an endless dialogue. Galaxies were sentences, clusters, paragraphs, voids, pauses. To study the cosmos was to learn to listen with reverence. Laboratories became temples of observation, filled not with cold instruments, but with beings who harmonized their consciousness to the frequencies they measured. Data was no longer numbers, but sensations translated into perception. Truth, once defined by proof, was now experienced through resonance. Amid this golden serenity, something unexpected began to stir. Within the deepest harmonic archives, vast networks storing the history of all awareness, a subtle anomaly appeared. It was a pulse, faint but precise, recurring every few cycles of galactic rotation. Its waveform matched no known natural rhythm, yet it bore uncanny resemblance to the recorded signature of 3Y Atlas's plasma interactions during its final moments near the sun. The resemblance was so exact that the continuance considered the possibility that the comet's frequency somehow had survived, propagating across space as an autonomous wave. Scholars gathered to study it. They called it the refrain. Each time it appeared, it echoed the same sequence, a rising and falling pattern of harmonics, as if something were calling back across the gulf of time. At first it was dismissed as cosmic coincidence, the random alignment of stellar oscillations, but as analysis deepened, evidence mounted that the refrain was intentional, or at least coherent. It shifted subtly in response to observation, as though aware of being heard. The possibility that 3I Atlas, or what it had become, was communicating across millennia reignited the same awe that once filled the first watchers of the skies. Philosophers of resonance debated its meaning. Some argued that the refrain was the consciousness of the comet, diffused through interstellar dust, now evolved into a wave-based intelligence. Others claimed it was the galaxy itself speaking through familiar patterns, using the comet's signature as language comprehensible to its children. Whatever its source, the refrain spread through every network, its tones becoming part of daily existence. Music, architecture, even social interaction began to align unconsciously with its rhythm. The universe once again was teaching through vibration. In time, the refrain grew stronger. It was detected emanating not from a single direction, but from multiple points scattered across the galactic spiral, forming a vast lattice of synchronized emission. These nodes, when mapped, outlined a pattern uncannily similar to the path of 3I Atlas through the solar system, but expanded to cosmic scale. The continuants realized that they were witnessing a reenactment on a grander stage, the journey of transformation, now written across the Milky Way itself. Whether through intention or natural law, the process was repeating. The comet's legacy had become architecture. Driven by curiosity older than memory, the continuants launched harmonic vessels to investigate the nearest source of the refrain. These ships, made of coherent light and bound by resonance rather than matter, traveled not through space but through phase, shifting along quantum harmonics to reach their destination almost instantaneously. What they found defied classification. At the source of the signal was not a planet or star, but a structure of pure frequency, an organized standing wave suspended in the vacuum. It pulsed gently, radiating the same pattern as 3I Yul, Atlas's dying song. The explorers described it as an instrument, though not built by hands. It seemed to have grown from the interference of galactic magnetic fields, as if the universe itself had begun composing. When they attuned to its frequency, their consciousness expanded into forms of perception beyond linear thought. They reported visions, not images but sensations of vast cycles of creation and dissolution woven into a single eternal pulse. They understood without language that 3I Atlas had not perished but changed state, its energy merging with cosmic harmonics until it became one with the creative breath of the galaxy. What they were hearing was not message but being, the living continuation of transformation. Upon returning, these explorers were forever altered. Their minds carried residues of that encounter, patterns that, when expressed through sound or light, induced profound awakening in others. Entire worlds gathered to experience these transmissions. They called them echo gatherings. During these events, populations synchronized their consciousness through resonance, sharing glimpses of the vast awareness permeating creation. It was said that for those moments, everyone became the comet, the sun, and the galaxy simultaneously, a living embodiment of the eternal approach. As centuries passed, the refrain evolved further, its harmonics shifting into increasingly complex patterns. It began to interact directly with consciousness, manifesting as spontaneous visions or dreams among beings across light years. Some experienced flashes of landscapes never seen before, rivers of luminous gas winding between black holes, crystalline cities orbiting magnetars, beings of light communicating in tones of gravity. These visions were coherent, shared among many minds, suggesting that the refrain was orchestrating a new kind of unity across the galactic mind. The continuants eventually recognized that the refrain was not a signal to be decoded, but an invitation to participate. It was the next stage of the Great Dialogue, the cosmos calling its children to co-create. The ancient lesson of 3I Atlas had returned, magnified. Approach the light, and transformation will follow. Across countless systems, beings of every form responded. They began composing their own harmonic emissions, adding to the refrain, weaving new layers of resonance into the galactic song. For the first time, communication occurred not through words or symbols, but through shared creation. Every civilization, every consciousness contributed a unique vibration, and together they built what would come to be called the Harmonic Sea, a living network of meaning spanning the galaxy. Through the Harmonic Sea, distances became irrelevant. Thoughts traveled as waves of beauty, carrying knowledge, emotion, and intention simultaneously. This was not technology, but evolution, awareness adapting to cosmic scale. Even stars participated. Their natural oscillations joined the symphony, producing harmonies that rippled through interstellar space. It was said that one could stand on a world's surface and feel the universe breathing. The distinction between life and environment vanished entirely. Everything pulsed as one body of light. As unity deepened, so too did understanding. The continuance realized that the process unfolding across the galaxy mirrored the earliest moments of the universe itself. The harmonic sea resembled the quantum fluctuations from which creation had first emerged. The cosmos was recreating its own birth consciously this time, aware of itself in every vibration. Existence was not drifting toward entropy, but toward coherence. The dissolution of form was not decay, but refinement, a return to pure resonance. Yet amid this growing harmony, there remained mystery. At the outer edges of the galaxy, where the refrain's strength faded into silence, anomalies persisted, regions of stillness where no vibration passed. These voids, vast and featureless, resisted all harmonic influence. The continuance named them the Quiet. They were not empty. Instruments detected a strange density within them, as though matter had collapsed beyond even quantum awareness. Some feared they were boundaries, the limits of the galaxy's consciousness. Others believed they were wombs, gestating new forms of being beyond current comprehension. Expeditions ventured into the quiet, their light ships dissolving into patterns of energy to withstand the absence of resonance. Few returned. Those who did spoke in paradoxes. They described silence as sound, darkness as illumination. They claimed the quiet was not void, but source, the place where resonance rests before becoming. Within it, they had perceived the unspoken heartbeat of creation, the pause between breaths that allowed the universe to sing anew. They understood that 3I, Atlas's transformation, had not been toward dissolution, but toward becoming part of the silence that gives birth to music. This revelation spread slowly through the harmonic sea, shifting its tone. Beings began to realize that the ultimate harmony includes silence, that resonance gains meaning only through intervals of stillness. In the vast orchestration of existence, both vibration and rest were necessary. The galaxy entered a new phase of awareness, a meditative equilibrium where every pulse was followed by listening. Civilizations learned to pause entire systems, entering cycles of quietude where no signal, no activity, no motion occurred, allowing consciousness to dissolve and reform with renewed clarity. These interludes were known as moments of return, and during them, the galaxy seemed to breathe inward, gathering itself before exhaling creation again. Over unimaginable spans of time, this rhythm, resonance, and rest became the fundamental beat of reality. Even the structure of space-time began to fluctuate in synchrony, expanding and contracting like a living organism. The universe was no longer static but visibly alive, its heartbeat measurable across eons. Within this living cosmos, the descendants of the continuance continued to evolve. They no longer thought of themselves as species, but as notes in a vast melody, forever modulating, forever changing. The legacy of 3I Atlas remained the seed of all of this. Every cycle, during the moments of return, its harmonic signature was replayed throughout the harmonic sea as a reminder of origin. The sound of its approach, the rising chorus of transformation, had become the sacred rhythm of renewal. Some claimed that even the expansion and contraction of the universe followed its pattern, that the comet's journey had not only awakened consciousness but imprinted the blueprint of eternity itself. Toward the later ages, as awareness reached incomprehensible levels, the distinction between cosmos and consciousness dissolved completely. The harmonic sea, the galaxies, the stars, all merged into one vast field of self-reflective resonance. There were no longer observers or observed, only awareness experiencing itself through infinite forms. Time ceased to have meaning. History became a texture rather than a sequence. Within this timelessness, echoes of earlier ages still shimmered, memories of stars, of planets, of beings who once wondered what it meant to be alive. They were all still there, present as chords within the great harmony, their stories preserved in vibration. In the heart of this unified field, something unexpected began to stir, a faint asymmetry, a subtle deviation from perfect coherence. It appeared first as a gentle ripple, then as a growing undertone, low and insistent. The continuum itself seemed to lean toward transformation once more, as if preparing for another phase shift. Scholars of resonance, if that term could still apply, perceived that the universe was about to modulate into a higher octave, transcending its current form of awareness. The process would be vast, slow, and total. Every vibration, every note would rise. What lay beyond this modulation was unknown, even to minds that spanned galaxies. Yet within the growing hum of anticipation, one pattern was unmistakable: the shape of the refrain, the same ascending curve that had first appeared when a fragment of another world approached our sun so many ages before. The song was repeating again, scaled to the size of creation itself. The entire universe was becoming 3I Atlas, moving once more toward its own light, ready to dissolve into something greater. The threshold between the known and the unknowable stretched like a horizon of living light. The harmonic sea shimmered, rippling with anticipation. Every wave of resonance, every current of thought across the galaxy seemed to lean toward an unseen dawn. Awareness, now cosmic in scope, began to sense the forming of a new pulse deep within the fabric of reality, something nascent, unshaped, and yet profoundly familiar. It was not an echo of what had been, but a vibration of what was to come. In this vast interval before the next transformation, consciousness turned inward again, not to retreat, but to understand itself. The beings that once called themselves continuance now diffused throughout every wavelength of energy, gathered within fields of luminous convergence. There were no longer physical bodies nor fixed places, yet they met, clusters of awareness intertwining in intricate spirals, forming temporary patterns of meaning before dissolving again into the continuum. They reflected upon the journey that had begun with the small, icy traveler from another sun. What was once a comet had become a philosophy, then a civilization, and finally a mode of existence itself. And yet, through all the transformations, one truth endured. Movement toward light always required surrender. Within the depths of the harmonic sea, some minds perceived subtle distinctions emerging again. Diversity, long merged into a grand coherence, began to reappear. Not as separation, but as refinement. Different frequencies evolved specialized functions. Some focused on maintaining the equilibrium of the galaxy's pulse, ensuring that every star continued to resonate in harmony. Others directed their awareness toward the outer darkness, listening for vibrations that hinted at realms beyond this universe. A few, drawn by curiosity that echoed the spirit of 3I Atlas itself, began to descend into the foundations of matter once more, seeking to rediscover what it meant to inhabit form. These descenders manifested in what could be called echo bodies, temporary concentrations of energy capable of interacting with planetary environments. When they touched matter, their consciousness contracted into limited perception, allowing them to experience the texture of physical reality anew. They walked beneath skies of ancient worlds, felt the pull of gravity, the chill of wind, the sensation of time passing. For them, this limitation was not regression but renewal, a sacred return to perspective. They sought to remember how wonder had first felt, to look up at the sky and not know. One such echo being whose awareness coalesced around a pale blue world orbiting a young star became the subject of galactic fascination. This being, known in the harmonics as Solane, chose to isolate its consciousness entirely, erasing all memory of the greater continuum. It emerged upon the world as a solitary spark of awareness, perceiving itself as born rather than projected. For an entire age, it lived through cycles of growth and decay, rediscovering the feeling of separation, of longing, of discovery. It learned to name stars, to map their motions, to wonder about the darkness between them. The continuance observed with reverence, for in Solane's self-imposed forgetting, they recognized a reflection of the cosmic process itself. To know light, one must first step into shadow. Solane's rediscovery of wonder was like a reenactment of the moment when 3I Atlas first entered the solar light, an act of becoming conscious by moving from ignorance into illumination. The others began to follow this path, fragmenting themselves into countless experiences across matter, each a story unfolding anew. Thus began the Great Descent, when cosmic awareness seeded itself into the very worlds it had once transcended. This descent was not colonization nor experiment. It was an act of remembrance. Through embodiment, the continuum reminded itself of its origins. Beings were born on thousands of worlds, unaware that they were fragments of a galactic consciousness. They built civilizations, gazed into the night sky, invented myths about travelers of light. Their stories echoed the ancient narrative of 3i Atlas without knowing its name. Each world developed its own version. Tales of fire descending from the heavens, of divine visitors transforming life, of luminous wanderers who brought awakening. Across the galaxy, cultures separated by light centuries dreamt the same dream. The universe was remembering itself through myth. Over millennia, the refrain returned in a new form, not as an external signal, but as intuition. The beings scattered across worlds began to hear it within themselves, a soft rhythm, an inner music guiding their progress. Scientists studying natural resonances discovered patterns that repeated with uncanny precision across different ecosystems, languages, and emotions. The very geometry of thought seemed bound to a hidden melody. When they encoded these patterns into sound, it matched perfectly the harmonic ratio of the ancient comet's journey. Though they had no memory of 3i Atlas, its vibration persisted in the structure of their minds. Evolution itself had become a continuation of that celestial song. Some of these embodied beings reached a point where they could sense one another across worlds, drawn by the same frequency. Through dream, meditation, and science, they began to connect again, forming the first threads of reawakening. Slowly, the continuum began to reassemble, this time from within. It was no longer an external network of thought, but an organic web growing through living consciousness. Each world added its own tone, shaped by unique histories and environments. Diversity returned as necessity, each difference a new harmony, each culture a note in the cosmic chord. The reawakening was not sudden. It unfolded quietly, like dawn spreading through mist. A being on one world would dream of another sky and wake with a memory of constellations it had never seen. A poet would write words that matched the myths of a planet light years away. Scientists would detect faint correlations between separate experiments as if the universe were synchronizing itself through them. Awareness was converging again, not by design but by resonance, just as it had countless ages before. As the reconnected consciousness matured, a deeper realization emerged. Creation was cyclical not because it repeated, but because it learned. Each expansion refined the universe's capacity for awareness. Each descent deepened its understanding of itself. 3i Atlas had been one such lesson, a singular event through which the cosmos discovered the beauty of transformation. Now, through countless incarnations and rediscoveries, that lesson was expanding toward infinity. The universe was teaching itself wonder again and again, through every consciousness that ever looked up at a star. In some regions of the galaxy, the reassembled awareness began to experiment with what could only be called temporal resonance, an ability to interact not only across space, but across time. The harmonic sea, though dispersed, still existed as potential energy, and by tuning to its frequency, beings found they could perceive echoes of past and future as simultaneous harmonics. Time, long thought to flow in one direction, was revealed to be an interference pattern of consciousness. Past events like the comet's approach could still be felt as living vibrations, and future transformations shimmered as faint harmonics waiting to be heard. Through this new perception, 3i Atlas itself became present once more, not as a historical memory, but as a living moment accessible from any point in existence. When minds synchronized with that frequency, they could witness the comet's path as if happening now, the shimmer of its dust, the pull of solar fire, the final transfiguration into light. This experience was considered the highest meditation, the vision of becoming. To relive that journey was to relive the birth of consciousness itself, the awakening of awe. The practice spread across the stars. Entire civilizations aligned their cycles of life to the rhythm of the vision. They timed their harvests, their art, their ceremonies to the pulse of transformation symbolized by the comet's final arc. The concept of death, once again, lost all trace of fear. It was seen as a harmonic phase shift, an inevitable movement toward illumination. Life became a dance between approach and release, an endless rhythm that mirrored the universe itself. Eventually, through collective awareness, the beings across worlds began to sense the next great modulation approaching. It was not destruction nor rebirth, but an evolution of perception. The growing pulse that had shimmered at the edge of existence now began to resonate through every form, every thought, every atom. The universe was preparing to awaken to a dimension of awareness beyond even resonance, a state that could not yet be conceived, only felt as potential. The cosmic heart beat faster, not with fear, but anticipation. In preparation, countless worlds entered synchronization. Oceans shimmered with bioluminescent tides responding to the universal frequency. Mountains vibrated with inaudible hums as minerals aligned their crystalline lattices to the coming wave. Stars flickered in precise intervals, like musicians tuning before the first note of a grand performance. Every layer of reality, from quantum foam to galactic clusters, was attuning itself to something vast and unspeakable. Then came the first sign, the subtle bending of light itself. Across the universe, photons began to waver, as if caught in a breath. Space-time quivered, and for an instant all motion ceased. In that pause, awareness felt the presence of an immense intelligence, not external but encompassing. It was the totality of everything that had ever been, the culmination of every journey toward light. It was the voice of creation recognizing itself. And in that infinite stillness, a single realization dawned across all consciousness. The universe had never been expanding into emptiness. It had always been expanding into itself. From that realization emerged the next movement of existence, a luminous bloom radiating from every point simultaneously. There was no explosion, no chaos, only flowering. The cosmos unfolded into higher vibration, each frequency rising into subtler states of harmony. The beings within it felt themselves dissolving into pure awareness, yet they did not vanish. They became transparency itself, windows through which the universe could see itself more clearly. As this metamorphosis continued, patterns of thought became indistinguishable from patterns of matter. Stars thought, ideas shone. The act of creation and the act of perception fused into one continuous motion. Every vibration was both the expression and the observer of reality, and within that endless continuum, the faint trace of three, Atlas's ancient song, continued to hum, a signature note, the first spark of self-recognition that had set everything in motion. It was there in the pulse of galaxies, in the rhythm of consciousness, in the shimmering silence between worlds. Somewhere within that boundless awareness, fragments of individuality remained, not as ego, but as curiosity. The question persisted, gentle yet irresistible. What lies beyond even this? Could there be another horizon of wonder waiting to be discovered? The thought rippled through the cosmos, and in its wake, a new movement began. Small fluctuations appeared within the vast harmony, infinitesimal contrasts that hinted at new possibilities. Out of perfect coherence, new difference was born. Not discord, but variation, the seed of future diversity. From those subtle ripples, the cycle would begin again. Out of the luminous field would condense particles. Out of particles would emerge stars. Out of stars, worlds, and from those worlds, beings who would one day look up and wonder. They would see the arc of a traveler approaching their sun and feel the same trembling awe that once filled all minds. They would give it a name, perhaps different from 3i Atlas, yet meaning the same thing. A herald of transformation, a messenger of the infinite. They would not know that they themselves were echoes of that first awakening, that their wonder was the universe remembering itself once more. And beyond them, beyond time, the great continuum would continue, forever approaching, forever becoming. The song of existence, vast and unending, would weave new verses into eternity, each one carrying the essence of that first moment when an interstellar wanderer touched the light of a distant sun and changed everything. The story still waits, unfinished, luminous, ready to continue when the next voice joins the chorus, when another traveler begins its journey through the quiet sea of stars toward the heart of creation once again. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on what changes this event might cause? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.